And you can't even drive? I can. Are you stupid, eh? Are you a stupid fool? Well, why can't you drive then? You can't even drive! A bit grey today, isn't it?
Well, hello everyone. I'm here. Welcome to another Deepest Lore. And I'm here with Mr. D, who has been resident on the show at least for the past 10 episodes. But for many other episodes too. It's show number 100, Mr. D. Number 100.
Yeah, yay. Hey.
I always love the idea of a pathetic celebration with a single balloon that's floated up into the corner, you know.
It's stuck in the corner of the ceiling, yeah. You know, like a fairy cake with like a single dripping birthday candle on it.
Yeah,
I
don't know if you.
Someone sat alone wearing a party hat and a noisemaker, you know.
Yes, exactly. And I'll tell you who has the perfect face for it, which is Mark from Peep Show, especially when he does that little L Dude Brothers thing. That is the essence of the sad celebration.
Oh.
Anyway, we are going to celebrate this occasion. Pharaoh is due to be back, but he'll have to be on next week now.
Too bad, Pharaoh. Too bad.
But we're going to celebrate by talking about horror movies. And you know, in the spirit of our shows together, D, I have done no preparation whatsoever. But I reckon that you and I probably have forgotten more about horror movies than most people know. So, I'm not even that into horror. It's just I would say a side effect of our personalities that would be the case.
Yeah, it's certainly true. It's certainly true. Oh wait, hang on. Wait, I've hang on. Oh, okay. Here we go. How about that?
I will just mention before we get going that the Mega code Mega. This is the last time you're going to be able to use it. Mega promo code Mega, £100 off the Mega bundle at the Academic Agency, and then the big autumn sale will start tomorrow. D with the promo code Merit. Although don't use Merit yet because it won't work yet. But from tomorrow's Unpopular Opinions, Merit will be good to go. So there we are. All right. Anything you'd like to promote?
Sorry, a little late on that one. Yeah.
You're going to have to send me those for when I make the video.
Okay, yeah, I'll send you them. There's as you know, there's various versions of them. So.
Merit.
Okay. Do I have anything to write? No. Other than the I've been doing those Twitter Space things. I don't know if you've tuned in, but
I briefly tuned in. I've only caught one of them, which was last night. You know, I was still up at like 5 a.m. doing.
I know you're the only person I'm like. Well, he may be actually awake, so he may tune in.
I listened to a good bit of banter about turkeys, and then Mad Lad Chris Gard came in and started saying some interesting things. But,
yeah, I end up with the Antipodeans always end up on. I mean, they've been on most of them. Like him and Thirsty Benito have been on many of them because they're like it's in the middle of the afternoon for them. So
right, yeah.
So they're out and about. But I get other people. Red Hawk was on last night.
Was he really?
Yeah.
I hear that Reprobate Time Stealer was on.
Oh, and Time Stealer is frequently on. Yeah, usually I get Time Stealer like in between. Like he's apparently has constant difficulties with his domestic situation, so I usually get him with his head smushed into a pillow, groaning vaguely northern things. So they're great fun, but I mean, it usually starts with me rambling on about some topics, and then people join, and we have a bit of a laugh. So if you're interested, you just catch them when they happen. They're very ephemeral, and I would say it's an elite project, so only elites are going to be interested in it. So do tune in if you happen to see one of those flash before your eyes on twitter.com.
Now, I don't know really what I thought, D, as a general plan for this show, that we just do a bit of a celebration of horror, good and bad, throughout the ages. And do you think we'll just go decade by decade, start in the 20s and go forward, and then I reckon we'll lose interest or run out of time by the time we reach the early 2000s, which is just as well, because I don't think I've watched any horror films after about 2012.
No, I don't think I've watched any films since about 2012.
I mean, they're generally not good, but there's a good few horror films in the 2000s and the early 2010s. There's a couple I recall, but for me, culture just drops off a cliff in the middle of the last decade. Not just wokery, just everything, writing,
everything,
performances, the fact I don't recognize any of the actors anymore, all that sort of stuff.
The world ended in about 2008, I think.
So, all right, we're going to try to be quite brisk. People are predicting we won't get past 1960, but let's see.
Well, I mean, I have no images. I don't have a folder of 400 images. We don't really have a plan. We haven't like laid out which films we're going to talk about. So we're not on a schedule really. So who knows where we'll go.
I mean, let's start in the 20s because it's not known as a decade of horror. I think when people think about the history of horror, their mind will immediately go to the Universal monsters in the early 30s, which we'll obviously get onto soon. And Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi. But there were a good couple of horror films in the 20s.
Yeah,
I think a lot of people would think about Nosferatu.
Yes.
I really like Haxan. I mean, there's a really weird version of it with William S. Burroughs doing the voiceover. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but I once went to see Haxan in an abandoned. It was like an abandoned cathedral, or like a kind of shell of a church in London. One of these kind of hipster things. But it was all like derelict, and they played it to a small audience. I'll never forget that. That was pretty cool, to be honest. And fans of AA Radio, I used Haxan quite a lot in some of my music vids.
I remember I was quite proud because I think I was the only person the first person to correctly identify it, because I knew it very well. So yeah.
There's a kind of wicked version of Faust from the 20s. I seem to recall. When is the I don't know if you class it as horror, but when is the Dante's Inferno? That's from the 20s as well. I dig that. I dig that one as well. When they children and all that.
I have to check. Let's see. Dante's Inferno.
Top of my head is like 24, 25, something like
that. It is oh God. Okay, hang on. There's Oh, it's 1924. Yeah, you're
24.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Henry Otto. Released by Fox. Yeah.
Trying to think of some other one. There's the the film, which is credited with inspiring the Joker, called The Man Who Laughs. I remember I used that in a couple of videos as well. It's kind of creepy. It's kind of creepy. A lot of these films are German expressionist. But do you have any particular love for kind of 20 silent film? Or...
Absolutely. In fact, I have a deep love for them. I love silent film in general, and I've always had quite a fascination for it. And certainly, I mean, it's very difficult to sort of get through an education in things like surrealism and such without encountering those films, because they were heavy influences. We skipped talking about The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which is another German expressionist film, and incredibly influential to both cinema and art, and yes, Nosferatu as well. The version of Haxan that you're talking about, William Burroughs, it was called something like The History of Witches or The History of Witchcraft. It was released in the 1960s, and basically it was a slightly bad print of Haxan with William Burroughs narrating, and they sort of turned it into kind of a quasi documentary, which it isn't. The original.
That version I saw, I think, had a live. They had some sort of live band playing, like which they often do, you know. Okay, so is there anything else about the 20s, or should we?
We're just briefly listing and then moving on. I was ready to have like a 40-minute discussion of themes in the Cabinet.
Well, I mean, I guess one thing to say about the 20s is that because it's such a long time ago, we're talking about 100 years ago, and the quality of the film and so on, and that I think any movie footage from the 1920s is slightly creepy. Doesn't matter what genre it is.
Yeah, indeed.
It has that kind of slightly ethereal, creepy quality. So I mean, I do think that the films from the 20s still have the ability to scare. I mean, not Nosferatu in itself. It's pretty creepy movie, I would say.
A very creepy movie. I'm trying to recall a little bit of flair about one of those. Hang on. There's an intertitle in Nosferatu, which so there's an intertitle in Nosferatu that says, and when he had crossed the bridge, the phantoms came to meet him. And I'm trying to remember, because that particular intertitle was a huge inspiration for one of the sort of core group of surrealist artists, who and I feel slightly embarrassed not remembering who it was, but basically he said that the entirety of surrealism could be understood if you made sense of that title card, which is in the film. But a couple of other notes, things that I remember about that. I mean, of course, the German actor, actually German, later became British actor, called Conrad Veidt, who plays Dr. Caligari or actually he plays Cesare in the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and he also plays the Man Who Laughs in that film that you mentioned from 1928. So very interesting character. He was also in Casablanca. He sort of lived into the era of talkies. I believe he died in the mid 40s. Also, strangely enough, the character of Caligari, his makeup, his appearance, was inspired by Arthur Schopenhauer.
Okay.
If you ever look into that, there are several portraits of Schopenhauer which apparently served as the inspiration for his look. There's the classic.
See if I can get a similar image from I use that as well, the Cabinet of I use all these 20 movies in my videos on I mean, not just because they have this creepy quality, but also because most of them are in the public domain, so you can kind of get away.
Yeah, that's the other good news.
But yeah, here he is from. If I can get this up.
And his name, by the way, is Max Schreck. That was the name of the actor who played. What is he called in that? He's called Count Orlok. Yeah. In Nosferatu.
Yeah. There we go. Oh, all right. So I'm keen to get on the basis that if we linger too long in the 20s, we'll never get the stream done. So
indeed,
I'm going to move on to because I've got a feeling we'll linger a bit longer in the 30s because there are several major milestones, let's just say, and stars that come about in the 30s. And it's really the universal cycle from the early 30s. Frankenstein, of course, Dracula, The Mummy. I mean, there's Bela Lugosi in Dracula in 31. James Whale's Frankenstein also in 31. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde comes out also in 31. The Phantom. Do you have any kind of memories or thoughts about these movies? I have to say that a little controversially, I think Todd Browning's Dracula is not his best movie, but also is kind of creaky. I think it's I don't know. There's I don't think it's the best film in the world. I'll just put it that way. But
wow,
what do you think?
The problem is, of course, I mean, I think that those films have become. Yes, I understand the criticism. I think that applies to a number of those Universal films. I mean, there are certainly weaknesses in some of them, but again, it just taken as a kind of single, sort of cultural sweep. I feel like they're one of those things it's just slightly beyond. They're slightly beyond any sort of petty criticism because they're just so I think culturally important, into what they sort of inspired and to what they became in a kind of consciousness. I mean, basically all our images of so many of these literary characters, because of course Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula was a 19th century novel, as was Frankenstein, and just so many of our ideas and images of these sort of archetypes and these characters and these books come from those films, and I'm willing to sort of allow them a little leeway. Again, I think that it's really a sort of it's a lot to do with the mood and the sort of gesture of a lot of those. I mean, especially when you take someone like Bela Lugosi. Meanwhile, incidentally, my dog is called Bella after Bela Lugosi, because she had small needle-like teeth when I first got her, and so Bella. Yeah.
I mean, there's a strange quality to some of those films as well, because Bela Lugosi, for example, was really a theatre actor, and he was from. Was he actually from Transylvania? He was from Hungary or something, right?
Yeah, he's not from he's not from Transylvania. No, he was from I should know this right off the top of my head because I'm a big Bela Lugosi fan. He's Hungarian, yeah. So he was born in Austria-Hungary in Lugos, Kingdom of Hungary, in 1882. So. But yes, I mean, of course, many of these people, as with this whole era of film of the 20s and 30s, many of these people got their start, on stage. These were stage actors, and so, and a lot of the, not just horror films, but if you watch a lot of films from that era, 20s and 30s, they're still in a strange transitional period, many of them, where you still very clearly see that they're conceiving of everything in terms of a stage, of a proscenium stage, and they're sort of filmed that way. The whole conception of how a film was made, I think, was originally sort of, they very much came from stage, from directing stage. So yeah, you do get that slightly weird, slightly mannered quality. I think it's difficult. I think you have to kind of break yourself in when you watch these older films and get used to that. And of course, they were also slightly. I mean, they were all slightly hammy. I mean, there's a slight affectation to all of them. Certainly Lugosi, a complete hambo. But I think that once you get into the vibe of that kind of mannerist performance is quite wonderful. But it isn't a modern performance, so people certainly have to get used to that before they watch these films.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of dig, just on the subject of Lugosi, and I think like a lot of people, I watched the film Ed Wood.
Which is one of my favorite films. In fact, I think that's the last good film that Tim Burton ever made.
So yeah, the Tim Burton Wood, Ed Wood. Obviously, Lugosi, famously features briefly in Plan 9 from Outer Space, and it kind of sent me down a bit of a rabbit hole. I also remember Christopher Lee did this kind of long history of horror thing at some point, which I watched it all, and there was a whole episode on Lugosi. I also remember in the Kinks song, what's the name of that song? It's about Hollywood Boulevard, where he's going down. Ray Davis is going down Hollywood Boulevard, and he's looking at all the tragic kind of lives.
It's not called Boulevard of Broken Dreams.
It's called what's that bloody Kinks song called?
Deepest Law 100. Google the stream.
Yeah, sorry, Celluloid Heroes. Celluloid Heroes.
Celluloid Heroes.
Where, there's a verse about Greta Garbo, and then he says, he mentions Bela Lugosi going through that, and again through that song, I kind of got into reading about. He's kind of a sad character,
Lugosi. Oh yeah,
Lugosi, like a kind of sad character. But in this initial run that he had, I actually kind of like some of his other movies more than Dracula, like White Zombie, say, or The Black Cat, or some of those other early Lugosi films. I don't know. Something about Dracula itself that I thought is kind of plodding, and I don't blame. So I don't think it's necessarily Todd Browning's fault, because like literally a year later he makes Freaks, which doesn't have any of those issues at all. So I don't. In fact, Freaks is a kind of stunningly modern film in comparison to Dracula, and yet it's made 1 year later.
Well, I would say again. I think also I believe that some of those books, certainly both Frankenstein and Dracula, they're very difficult to make adaptations of them. I think that it's very hard, and of course, I think that the existence of the Universal versions makes it even now harder to adapt them, because of course you're always going to be thinking about the archetypes set up by those Universal films anytime you make a Frankenstein or a Dracula. I mean, you do of course remember the 90s. They tried to remake both of those.
Yes.
Francis Ford Coppola made a version of Dracula, and Kenneth Branagh made a version of Frankenstein.
I remember, yeah.
And they were both, I don't think, entirely successful for various reasons.
Given that we're talking about Halloween, I still think that these versions of Dracula and Frankenstein dominate the public imagination as to like, well, what does Frankenstein look like and what does Dracula look like?
Well, the Universal
Lugosi and Karloff.
Oh yeah, as I said, I mean, they establish archetypes that I think, are so embedded in our understanding of these characters that, I mean, if you say Dracula to people, what they're going to draw, to someone and say draw Dracula, they're going to draw some version of Lugosi, even if they don't know. I mean, many people aren't going to know this film. Many people have not seen it. I mean, in fact, I would say probably a majority of younger people have never seen any of these films. But again, the images created by these Universal films, they're so deeply embedded that you don't even need to see the film to sort of, that becomes your sort of understanding of these characters. So yeah.
Any other of the Universal movies that you want to mention?
God, oh dear, oh dear. And there's so many. The Island of Lost Souls is a wonderful one. The Black Cat, and of course, The Bride of Frankenstein, is became such a trope. And I think inspired so many then sort of subsequently 1950s kind of horror science fiction films. Yeah,
I mean, you could argue that's arguably the better film as well, Bride of Frankenstein.
Yeah, that's certainly an unpopular opinion, but I might agree with you there. The Invisible Man. What else? Phantom of the Opera, of course. And then, of course, there's many that people won't remember. There's like Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, and the Mummy's Ghost, and the Mummy's Curse, and they, like Hollywood has always done, when they hit a vein of gold, they kept mining, and sometimes they delve too greedily and too deep. So they maybe diminishing returns, but yeah, I mean, yeah, wonderful ones. And of course, the Universal, I mean, they continued to make these films into the 40s and into the 50s. I mean, The Creature from the Black Lagoon was a Universal film. And then there were those dreadful what do they call, what was that duo act? Abbott and Costello. They did parodies where it was like Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein, and so diminishing returns, but I do think that there's many wonderful films amongst those. And I think we should also mention that when you hear about many of these films from the 1930s, and certainly many of those Universal films, people call them pre-code. And do you think we want to explain to people what it's meant by that?
I mean, I think it's worth mentioning that I had always learned that audiences turned on horror as the 30s went on, and that ostensibly it was because during the Great Depression and then with the horrors of war or whatever, in those sorts of darker times, people don't want horror; they want like comedy, or something like that, or they want romance. And I kind of took that as gospel. I can't remember where I read it, but I read that for many years. But then looking into that question more recently, a lot of people now think that literally it was just because of the Hays Code coming in was it 34, 35?
Yeah, it was 1934, I think.
Which, because there was kind of moral panic around the content of some of these horror films, and critics subsequently have said actually the downturn in horror was due to the limitations put on by the Hays Code and so on. Well, maybe it's a combination of both those things.
It was probably both of those things. I certainly think the Hays Code had a hugely chilling effect on cinema in general, not just horror films. I mean, if you think, of course, about all of the kind of crime, sort of dramas and things like that, that the pre-code films, like all of the Cagney films and such, and then all of the kind of very risque material coming out as well, pre-code. I do think that a lot of these things were sort of squashed by the code. but I do think it's always going to be more complicated than people posit with these things. I don't think you can point to one thing, but the code, which was it just was impossible. It was impossible from the start. I mean, and of course it was constantly subverted, and it was actually adopted earlier than 1934, but it was just not enforced correct, in any way until the mid 30s. So, but yes, I mean, if you're wondering if you don't know what pre-code means, if you just look into like the Hays Code, I think it was called the Motion Picture Production Code, is the actual name of it. It's basically an attempt to kind of clamp down on violence and and a lot of other things as well. I mean, of course, in miscegenation was anti-miscegenation was part of the Hays Code as well. It wasn't just things like violence and sex. It was many other subjects as well. So,
well, while we're still on the Universal guys, can I press you, D? Lugosi, Karloff. There's also Lon Chaney, and then later on there's Lon Chaney Jr.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on like who the best of these classic horror actors were?
Yeah, that's difficult. I mean, of course, they also had their own strained relationships between each other. I mean, famously in the Tim Burton film Ed Wood from 1994, the Lugosi character played by Martin Landau. Makes several references to his disdain for Mr. Karloff. Karloff? Fuck you! That limey cocksucker isn't even worth spilling my shit. So yeah, I mean, it's difficult to say. I would say that it really depends on the situation. I mean, Lugosi was a very different type of actor than Karloff, with different sort of goals. So, but as far as versatility, Lon Chaney was difficult to beat. But I don't know. I don't know if I had to pick.
Yeah, I will say that in some of those other movies, Lugosi does have some insane moments. So if you kind of like mental ham, there's some good there's just some good random moments, and I mean, I can't remember. They kind of blur into each other for me, but like when he's a mad scientist and all that sort of stuff, it's kind of.
Oh yeah, I mean, and of course, the later you go, the more insane it gets. I mean, Lugosi, if people don't know, I mean, he became quite addicted to opioids, particularly morphine, and he was one of the first Hollywood celebrities to have like a public rehab moment. That was a huge story at the time, that Lugosi literally, told the press, like spoke to the press about his experience, in drug rehabilitation. That was never done before that. And so that was a big deal, but that wasn't until much later on. Another thing people won't probably remember is that there was a whole genre called serials, which were kind of serialized short films that were shown in cinemas often before the feature film. So, you would go in, and of course, depending upon what the feature was, you would have, either you would have a newsreel, which was, current events, or you would have a cartoon. You would have, that's where the, Looney Tunes and all of those things got their start as film, as a pre-feature cartoon. Or you would get a cinematic serial, and Lugosi and many of these other actors were in those. I mean, famously, of course, George Lucas claims that Star Wars was inspired by these serials. I mean, I know, for instance, there was one called The Undersea Kingdom, which Lon Chaney was in, several episodes of that. That was where the the famous Star Wars titles that scroll in perspective, they sort of towards a vanishing point. I believe that came from Undersea Kingdom, that or one of those early serials. So yes, so later films were certainly inspired by those, and there's a lot of those that have like horror and science fiction elements. There's one that Lugosi was in called The Phantom Creeps, in which he plays a mad scientist who has discovered some source of divine power that he's going to use to take over the world, and he is really hamming it up in that. I mean, again, you can probably find versions of these on YouTube or elsewhere. Some of them are very hard to find, and many of these serials were lost, or bits and pieces of them were lost. But I know that the Phantom Creeps you can find. So yeah, and that's another, I think, lesser known avenue of horror films, and certainly vehicle for a lot of these actors that does that didn't really get a revival.
Now, before we move on from the 30s, I've just decided that for each decade, I'm going to pick out a kind of, decade best, or a personal pick for a decade best. For the 1920s, I have to go with Haxan because I love it. But what about you for the 20s? Before we move on
for the 20s, I will pick Nosferatu because it's just so iconic. But there's a lot to choose from there.
For the 30s, I kind of have to go with Freaks, to be honest. Although there's I don't know if you've ever seen The Hunchback of Notre Dame from 1939.
Yeah.
That's always stayed with me ever since I've seen it. I think it's Charles Laughton is
Laughton. Yeah,
is the Hunchback. But that is another big movie that we haven't mentioned from the 30s, of course, which would have been classed as horror, is King Kong.
Oh yes, absolutely, King Kong. Which spawned its own genre, of giant monster films that certainly come into play in the 50s and 60s. It's going to be certainly difficult to choose from the 30s. Another thing I want to say about the silent films and about the 30s films, I mean, like you mentioned Charles Laughton in The Hunchback of Notre Dame. I think a lot of what I would think of call the essence of cinema is contained in those films. It's something that people forgot about. I mean, certainly with the advent of sound and the kind of technological revelations, the sort of coming of color film and such things. But there is something that to do with, again, a real kind of engagement with the human face and the sort of gesture and the sort of subtlety of all those things. I mean, the subtlety of a look, I mean, that, of course, when you were directing a silent film or some of these early films, I mean, you still remembered. I mean, because of course that was where you got your emotional impact from. You didn't have a soundtrack. You didn't have speeches or dialogue to do that. I mean, you had to convey everything through the cinema frame, the eye of the camera, and the gesture of the actor. Not their ability to deliver a speech, but their ability to deliver a look. And I think that is something that you can still see in those Universal films, but of course I think ended really with the 30s and into the 40s. I think that type of really deep cinema disappeared, as people got acclimated to sound films. And so I do think there's a really special character, the type of portrayals in those films. I mean, we call it kind of stagey, and it can be quite hammy to modern eyes, but again, you have to look at them. It's almost more akin to poetry than prose. I mean, I always think of those early films as more on the side of poetry, and then of course as sound film and color film progresses, I think cinema often veers more towards prose than poetry. So I think the 20s and 30s were the era of poetry in cinema, rather than the prose that we became used to later on. So I would urge people to really give them a watch if you haven't. Freaks is a tough one, because of course every assessment of Freaks is going to be in retrospect, because of course it was a huge flop when it came out.
Yeah.
It was just a complete failure, and critics hated it. And so that's entirely
kind of ruined Todd Browning's career. Although I should note that Todd Browning did go back and make some vampire movies with Lugosi after that.
He did. I mean, he certainly had a career after that. But I don't think I don't think it ever really worked for him.
Well, I think one of the things that we should mention in those days, like a major studio like Universal or MGM or whatever, they would have had like A production lines and B production lines, right? So somebody like Todd Browning, like when people say, "Oh, his career was done," it was like, well, we're not going to give you any more A projects. You're down doing the B stuff, basically, if that makes any sense. So something like I don't know, like Mark of the Vampire, which was had Lugosi in it, had various people in it, but it's not like a kind of top line movie.
No.
in their cycle, if that makes any sense. So.
No, and of course Todd Browning had a very sad end. I mean, he basically, he made films after Freaks, but basically by the 1940s he was just completely finished. In fact, I think he basically spent the last 20 years of his life just in his house drinking, and because his wife died in the early 40s. And so, and he basically, was so sort of ostracized and shot off from Hollywood. I think they even published an obituary when his wife died, and just mistakenly thought that he had died.
What, just for making Freaks?
I think it was really the aftermath of Freaks and the complete financial failure of that, and the kind of backlash against it. That really, really ended his career. And of course, I mean, it was also the fact that as you say, people were just, by the rah-rah 1940s, people just were not having any of that. They weren't having, horror films. They didn't.
Blithe Spirit now. Yeah.
Yeah, there were very few even made. I mean, the Boomer Truth regime has started to creep in, and so, as I said, Todd Browning basically just sat in his house for 20 years and drank himself and literally died alone in 1962, which is quite strange to think about. But
I will say that Todd Browning has some deep cuts in his back catalogue, and he also has a period of his career which is silent. It's silent as well.
Yeah.
Because he started in the 20s. There's this one movie called The Unholy Three, where he has the ventriloquist and a dummy in it. I always think that the horror dummy is genuinely a creepy thing.
Really?
But especially in those, when we get to the 40s, we'll discuss Dead of Night. But The Unholy Three.
And of course, well into the 80s and 90s and 2000s, that the kind of evil dummy is like its own genre. There are many films about that. So, but also, before we leave, again, if you haven't seen Freaks, watch it, because Freaks is, whilst all the Universal films, I would say most of them aren't going to give you they're not going to scare you in the way that they would have probably scared people when they first came out. But Freaks is genuinely upsetting. You will be disturbed by Freaks. I guarantee you will. So, I think also the thing about Freaks that makes it so unsettling is that there's actual freaks in it. It's not just.
It's just insane. It is,
and I would say some of the final moments, involving a dancer and a swan, you're not going to forget those. Yeah, they're really genuinely upsetting. So.
Yeah. So are you going for Freaks as well? Were you both going
I'm
for double?
probably going to go for Freaks. Although I will also, I think, beside that, I will just put the kind of whole canon of classic Golden Age Universal horror films as well, because I just admire them so much. So
If I had to pick out a non-Freaks, I kind of dig White Zombie. You know, it's just I don't know. Like I feel like there are some underrated Lugosi outings after Dracula that kind of get a bit overshadowed. But White Zombie, I will go with. I also like the original Mummy, which we haven't
The Mummy
really
is
discussed
good,
much,
yeah.
which is another great Boris Karloff performance. I mean, the extent to which the Mummy, when I was a kid, the Mummy was a very solid part of the kind of Halloween canon, if you want to put it. Like it was always like Frankenstein, Dracula, maybe a witch, maybe some sort of witch, and a mummy would be there as well. But I feel like that's probably stopped being the case these days. You don't immediately think of the Mummy. I know there was a Mummy in the 90s, wasn't there? With
there was a whole series of Mummy films that were very popular. I don't know. I mean, people, it's funny, but people's conception of mummies are now entirely informed by Karloff's film. I mean, the whole even look, of course, because real Egyptian mummies are not wrapped like that. Like an actual, actual Egyptian mummies are wrapped in a totally different way. But it is the wrapping style from that film that is even cartoon mummies that they're they're versions of Karloff. So. It's difficult to deny the.
I just show people there's some creepy shots in that film as well.
Oh
just to show, if you haven't seen it, I mean, bearing in mind this is 1932, this is pretty good makeup as well.
Yeah, wonderful makeup, wonderful makeup.
Yes.
Yeah, Karloff was quite good.
Yeah, I mean, I believe some of the bitterness towards Karloff from Lugosi and maybe a couple of the others was because, unlike the others, he was kind of careful with his money, and he kind of landed on, like, he stayed relatively good, big star, and I don't know, somehow he managed his career better than the others. Do you think that's fair to say?
Well, he also wasn't a morphine addict, and that certainly helped. So there's a wonderful photograph of Karloff in his full Frankenstein makeup, having a cup of tea, on the set, which is people should look at. I'll see if I can find it. All right.
All right. So now moving on to the 1940s, not typically a decade associated with horror, but there are a couple of hidden gems in there. My mind immediately goes to the portmanteau horror film Dead of Night, which has got the aforementioned creepy dummy in it. But anything else spring to mind?
Boy, I've been thinking. I'm gonna have to look and see what was made, because I honestly can't recall any.
Well, there's the George Sanders film, The Picture of Dorian Gray.
Yeah, Picture of Dorian Gray, right? George, that's an incarnation of Sanders that you haven't used.
Yeah, I haven't used that version of Sanders yet, but
No.
trying to think of it. It's not. It is kind of out of vogue for most of the 40s horror, is it not?
Yeah. Let's see.
I seem to remember reading about a second wind when Lon Chaney Jr. He comes back as the Wolfman, and there's this kind of second universal cycle. But I have to admit I'm less familiar with that period than I am with the early 30s stuff.
Same. Okay, now I'm looking at a list here, and there are a few. I mean, I forgot. There's Victor Fleming's version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde with Ingrid Bergman and Spencer Tracy, which is quite good, from 1941.
Holy shit! I'm looking here, right? I'm not kidding you, D. they were still banging out, right?
Yeah.
This is right. This is just in 1940, right? 1940.
Yeah.
The Ape, starring
The
Boris
Ape.
Karloff. Before I Hang, starring Boris Karloff. Black Friday, starring Karloff and Lugosi. The Devil Bat, starring Lugosi. This is all just in 1940 now.
Yeah.
They were just absolutely like, you know, they're making 6, 7, 8 films a year. Look at this one: Peter Lorre, Karloff, and Lugosi. You'll find out.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with any of these movies, apart from, but I think I've seen Black Friday back in the
Well,
day.
you'll find out it's a comedy. I mean, so what happens in the 40s is that basically they take all of the genres from the 1930s and they turn them into screwball comedies with like Bob Hope and Kay Kaiser and Abbott and Costello. I mean, like, yes, you'll find out is one of those. The Ghost Breakers is another one from 1940 with Bob Hope and Paulette Goddard. And there's lots of those. There's lots of ridiculous. But
my God, I mean, look, 41, Black Cat, Devil Commands, Jekyll and Hyde, as you mentioned.
Basil Rathbone, forgot about him.
I mean, there's what I'm saying is that during the 40s, Lugosi and Karloff were both making still between 4 and 5 films a year, just banging them out, basically.
Yeah.
And then, as far as I can tell, this just carries on until we get to the time of the real, you know, the Abbott and Costello, and then it kind of falls off a cliff again. So that when was the Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein came out in 1948?
Or 48, yeah, post-war. You'll see that that also the kind of Karloff and Lugosi, you know, sort of diminishing returns stopped by about the end of the war, you know, by 1945, 44, 45. I mean, Karloff is in a few others after that, but and of course Lon Chaney Jr. has popped up. He's in many films.
They make a whole other Mummy cycle, the Mummy's Curse, the Mummy's Ghost. This is all Lon Chaney Jr. now. But I have to admit that I have not sat down and watched these movies. I'm aware of them due to the various horror documentaries I watch, but I haven't taken the time to dig into some of this early 40s material.
They're dread. Some of them are absolutely dreadful. I mean, there's something about the 40s, especially the American 40s, that I often find quite irritating. You know, that just that kind of you know, Junior G-Man, rah, let's, you know, remember Pearl Harbor, screwball, you know, I don't know. There's that kind of comedy, that upbeat kind of comedy aesthetic. That
I've talked about
some reaction to the war, but
I've talked before about the upbeat kind of late 40s narrator that's in a lot of those things.
Yeah, indeed.
He endures into the 50s as well. He is such an irritating twat, you know. But it's in a lot of the tone of a lot of this stuff as well. But I'm wondering if there's any kind of hidden gems in here, though. Now that I'm looking.
There certainly are. I mean, there certainly are hidden gems. I notice, of course, that I can tell that we are going to majorly trigger like real horror film autists. I can already see that we are. You know, we're stepping over all of the obscure autistic things that we should.
I seem to remember I watched The Black Cat back when I was really kind of trying to get into this stuff, but I mean, there must be about 40 films here, and not a lot of them ring any bells with me. So
no, well, and this of course is this is a different Black Cat. You know, there was an earlier Black Cat. So.
Oh right, it's a remake of the Black.
It's a comedy. It's a comedy remake. I mean, most of these.
Right, okay.
Most of these films are comedy remakes, and of course, it was 10 years on, and they were already kind of, you know, these were made with clearly with the understanding that the golden age of these films had passed. I mean, they were doing retrospectives 10 years later of that whole era, as if it was like 50 years in the past. So
what do they call those kind of cheapy production houses of this era? Poverty Row, is it?
something like that.
I'm just having a look now. A lot of these movies, like The Invisible Ghost, starring Bela Lugosi, was made by Monogram Pictures, which exclusively made low budget Poverty Row pictures, basically. So tiny budget, probably designed to be like the second movie in a double bill or something, like a kind of B, like the B film or whatever.
And I'm also seeing the names of some real hack directors who continued into the 1950s, like Sam Newfield and who else did I see on here? I mean, you are starting to see, certainly as you get to the end of the 40s, you start to see a little bit of what was to come with the 50s, which was dominated by these cheap, these sort of lower end production companies. American International Pictures, things like that.
So on the basis of absolutely no competition whatsoever, as far as I can see, am I just going to stick with Dead of Night as the horror movie of the 40s? I mean,
yeah, I'm gonna go with either Picture of Dorian Gray or Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde from Victor Fleming for the 40s. Okay, yeah. It's slim pickings for real horror. If you like screwball comedy horror, then the 40s is the decade for you, because that's what most of these are.
I don't. I mean, as we'll see when we get to the 80s, I don't like. I don't like it when when horror gets silly. I know there's a type of horror fan,
camp,
who loves kind of camp and silly.
Yeah.
I don't mind horror genre tropes when you're just safely within the genre and it's not doing anything madly outside of it. I don't mind that, i.e. when horror is generic, but it has to be reasonably serious, not kind of aware of its tropes. When it starts getting aware of its tropes, it's kind of deconstructing itself, and I'm not that keen on that.
Well, that ruins everything. I mean, not just these films; it ruins everything. I think like the same thing happened to advertising. I mean, even I think you've mentioned the same thing happened to wrestling.
Oh, everything. Yeah, it's a kind of. I mean, Oswald Spengler. In fact, Vico, who I've been writing on, has a brilliant phrase for it. It's called the barbarism of reflection, which is basically this kind of, when you start to rationalize and deconstruct things, you end up destroying the thing itself.
Absolutely, and I do think that is behind why I just hate so many things now, because everything is done in quotation marks. There's something quite awful about that, and it certainly drains all the. I mean, when I talked about the early cinema being a cinema of poetry, I mean, nothing is more opposed to poetry than that type of deconstructed, ironic, representation. So hang on, I will be right back. I need to tend to something for one moment.
Okay. No worries. I'll just see who's around in chat. Are there any movies, horror buffs, in the chat that we have missed from the 20s, 30s, and 40s that we should have discussed, you reckon? Let's have a look. What are good 20s, 30s, 40s horror movies that we did not discuss? All of the Val Lewton films, Cat People. Okay. So the Cat People, I Walk with a Zombie, The Leopard Man, The Seventh Victim, These are good movies, are they? I have to say, I am not. I haven't done my 1940s horror deep. I know. I mean, I was kind of into horror, but I was never into it as much as to two 1940s deep cuts. So I'm looking at Cat People now. Looks fun, actually. Looks like a fun movie. Okay. What else have we got? Gaslight. Was Gaslight out in the 40s? I thought Gaslight was on. Oh, yeah. Is that a horror movie, though? Gaslight? I remember. I remember studying the. It's based on a play by the same guy who wrote Rope, Patrick Hamilton. So, it was in the news recently when Angela Lansbury died. I think that was one of her first ever movies, Gaslight. So, but I don't think it's a horror movie. Just a kind of disturbing. We did discuss Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and Nosferatu, Holy Dissolution. Clean out your ears, son. We did discuss those films. Chucky was not released in the 40s, the 30s, or the 20s. Okay. Yes, obviously we can't look at the chat when we're doing a thing. I'm looking at the chat now. Let's have a look. Werewolves of London. I mean, there was a film called The Werewolf of London. I think it was another Lon Chaney Jr. He's mentioned in the famous song, of course, Werewolves of London. I play that to AAA sometimes and kind of do this kind of dance with her. She loves that song. I'm just scrolling back to see if there's anything. Carl Pilkington like freaks. Okay. White Zombie is in the public domain and on YouTube. Okay, well, you should watch it. You should watch White Zombie. What else? Yeah, a lot of people talking about freaks. In my view, the best one in the 30s. All right. Well, I might as well do super chats until D gets back. Holocron Record says the Deepest Law 100 Halloween Spooktacular is probably brought to you by McDonald's and Pfizer. The Deepest Law. How deep is your law? Well, if any massive company wants to sponsor me, send me an email. Even if you're a small company, especially if you make cigars, that would be a good tie into the channel. Holocron Record says, discovered your channel with a stream talking about the simple things in life you enjoy. But now I've seen every stream, but I cannot find that stream again. Did I imagine it? Cheers on 100 Deepest Laws. Stream talking about the simple things I enjoy in life. That sounds like it was an early Unpopular Opinions episode. If it was anywhere, it would be on Unpopular Opinions. So have a look in the Unpopular Opinions back catalogue. Something like Tiny Pleasures or something like that, I would have called it. Here's the Unix says, the best modern horror I've seen is called The Black Coat's Daughter, surprisingly created by Oz Perkins, of all people. I highly recommend and would like to hear Mr. D's opinion on the film. Here's the Unix also says, despite being based on a video game, Silent Hill is a strong horror movie. I watch it every year. It's also probably the best movie adaptation of a video game ever produced. And Dr. Pepper says, happy Halloween, everyone. Don't let Kwashi near your jack-o'-lanterns. Indeed. And I'll just have a look at the other super chats while D is dealing with whatever he's dealing with. Here we go. Port Film Co-op says Halloween is pos trash and should be boycotted. Mr. Theo Tugboat says, congrats on 100th episode. I watched them all, mostly live. I'm unsubbing if Jennifer Connelly doesn't win due to the egregious use of democracy Mr. Tugboat, I would say Jennifer Connelly is a very firm favourite to win the tournament.
What have I come back to?
Oh, sorry, I started doing super chats because
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
I might as well finish them, and then we'll carry on.
Right.
Vulpus Inculta says, recommend Witchfinder General, very unsettling film, and Vincent Price, actually terrifying instead of just fun to watch. Witchfinder General is a brilliant movie, which we'll get onto when we get to the 60s. I think it's 68, Witchfinder General, isn't it? C123 says, hello, AA and Dr. Mr. D. When will we get a 5 to 10 part series on Vince McMahon with Geo and Time Stealer? P.S. Greatly enjoying your spaces, Mr. D. I'll just tell you, Mr. C123, I have done a number of things on Vince McMahon, which you can go back and have a look at. But I'm loath to have guests on when I talk about wrestling for various reasons. It's just one of those things.
Well, you even did that sort of weird quasi wrestling stream with Pharaoh and Time Stealer about Rishi Sunak the other week.
And even then, Time Stealer was truck-like and kind of made subpar comments.
Did he? I certainly don't know much about wrestling. But,
it's a terrible. I don't know. Just it's like imagine having. I don't know. Imagine talking to me about art, for example. D.
Okay, yeah, fair point.
Colin says these live streams are starting to take on the quality of a based NPR. Well, Colin, if you have a read of the about on Academic Agent, it's called Radio 4 for woke people. So it was always the design of the channel to be a kind of like a based Radio 4, which is the kind of British equivalent of NPR, I would say. Do you think that's fair?
We get into. I mean, if you think about it, we've covered a very diverse range of subjects on the Deepest Law. So,
Herlock Shome says my favorite horror movie is 50 Shades of Blair, and somebody mentions this almost every stream. D. Fleur says Mr. D sounds like Douglas Murray.
Oh, fuck off! Fuck you!
Would you like to
no
renounce Douglas Murray and say that you're not him?
Yes. I may not be Douglas Murray. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Use the Eunuch says, please read my 2 super chats again for D when he's back. Yes, that's worth £3 for me to hear his response. He said, Yiz said, the best horror movie I've seen is The Black Coat's Daughter, surprisingly created by Oz Perkins. I would highly recommend it, and I would like to hear Mr. D's opinion of the film. The Black Coat's Daughter. Familiar with that?
Never heard of it.
Never heard of it. So there we go. I hope that was worth it, D.
Sorry, I've not heard of it. And yes, Red Hawk is right. I am not even. Douglas Murray is not even 1/10 his basic. I mean, I'm older than Douglas Murray. How terrifying is that? No, and I'm taller, I'm smarter, and I'm not a wet, miserable cuck. So there you go.
Now, moving on to the 1950s, D.
The 50s.
We are entering the era of, I mean, for whatever reason, horror goes out of vogue and sci-fi comes into vogue. So a lot of the horror movies of the 1950s have a sci-fi tie-in of some sort, right?
Indeed.
There are some exceptions, but there's a lot of just horror sci-fi, like I don't know, The Thing, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the Day the Earth Stood Still, The Incredible Shrinking Man. I'm just trying to think of some of those. Creature from the Black Lagoon is kind of sci-fi. The original Fly.
The original Fly.
Anything directed by Ed Wood.
Which we will talk about specifically. I mean,
did they do a War of the Worlds in the 50s? I'd be surprised if they didn't. I feel like there should be a war of the Worlds.
I can't remember. Did they do a War of the Worlds?
I'd be surprised if they didn't.
Were
the Quatermass films from the 50s, or is that 60s?
That's probably the early 60s, but I would have to check.
It came from beneath the sea.
Oh,
I
mean, of course in the 50s. I mean, talk about postmodern, but I have a genuine. This is sort of the decade that I associate with a genuine love. The 50s and the 60s with on their face bad films because many of these films are bad. I mean, certainly some of the cheaper, when you start getting into people like, when you mention Edward or, Bert I. Gordon or Roger Corman, when you start getting directors like this who started, really going in the by the mid 1950s. Yeah. I mean, there is a special place in many people's hearts for the slightly shit sci-fi horror of this era.
Yeah, and they often have like a monster, like Black Scorpion's another one. There's often a kind of monster in a suit, as well as a sci-fi element. There's some like creature that's crawled out of a swamp or something. A lot of the time, in a lot of these movies.
Oh yeah, and of course, it's also the era where it was like the horror of the everyday. So it's like basically, can you turn any creature or any sort of commonplace thing into a horror monster? So you get like Attack of the Giant Leeches, or you get the Earth versus the Spider, or you get it is also the sort of time of kind of we can make spiders horror into monsters by just making them really big.
Incidentally, the Quatermass.
Hello. Have I died, or is it you? I think that's an F for AA. AA, if you can hear me.
An old
AA.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we lost you. I didn't hear you there for a few seconds.
Have you ever seen the Attack of the 50-Foot Woman?
Yes, the Attack of the 50-Foot Woman.
I had a lecturer once who was, I don't know, she was kind of alright, but I remember one year she gave me a Christmas, well, kind of like a Christmas postcard, and I had Attack of the 50-Foot Woman on the front of it. It was a postcard of that, and I always thought, she tried to tell me something.
Yeah, I wonder.
It was kind of a strange thing, but
no, there's definitely an undertone. There's definitely a double entendre going on there.
So
there's a man version of that, of course. There's the amazing Colossal Man, which is a Bert I. Gordon film about. I mean, many of these films also. So of course, this was also the era where radiation was often the proximate cause of whatever the horror was, because I mean, the kind of go-to answer is of course this is all residual horror from the atomic bombing of Japan, which is also used to explain the Japanese movie monster. You Godzilla and Gamera and Mothra and Ibira and all of those.
I mean, some of the names of these movies: the Attack of the Giant Leeches, Attack of the Crab Monsters. That's a Roger Corman movie, by the way.
Oh, Roger Corman. Oh, the Roger Corman film. Attack of the Giant Leeches is quite something. It's quite something. Yeah, God, it's it's a bit like the Night of the Iguana meets a monster movie. I don't know.
And then, there's a lot of these, and a lot of them are like a good number of them are directed by Roger Corman. But there are lots of these guys who are just banging these out, right? Just banging them out one after the other. Who are some of the other directors? Some Howard Hawks, one of them. I want to say. The Creature from the Black Lagoon is one of the more famous ones. I Married a Monster. Yeah,
that's one of the last Universal kind of monster films.
That's actually a good one, though. That's like, by the standards of this period, that's quite good. I Married a Monster from Outer Space. Now, I have to admit, I've seen quite a few of these movies like secondhand through Mystery Science Theater. I want to say,
yes, you have, including Attack of the Giant Leeches. Many of these were done by MST3K, and yeah, I mean, many of the Corman films. He's Corman has directed 55 films and produced 385 films up to 2008, and he's still alive, of course. Well, I mean, the strange thing about some of these, another one, Bert I. Gordon, who did Earth versus the Spider and Puppet People and things like that, he is still alive as well, which is a bit odd.
So even though these sorts of kitschy sci-fi horror films dominate the decade, we do have to mention that the Hammer horror movies do start in the 50s. In the late 50s. I think the first Dracula was 58.
That early. Okay.
Yeah, that's Christopher Lee's first performance, and maybe even Frankenstein's a bit earlier.
The Mummy, 1958, with Lee and Cushing.
Yes.
Yeah.
So given that horror, the Hammer cycle starts here, we might as well start talking about them.
Well, before we move on, can we just have a brief word about Edward D. Wood Jr.?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's do that.
I mean, Edward D. Wood Jr. Many people will know him. Was a film director, who I don't know how you would describe him. I mean,
bad.
Yeah, very, very bad. Very bad. But for some reason, I think it's just because of the kind of, there's a kind of unashamed, just, I don't know what it is, the quality that made people want to start revisiting these. I mean, first of all, I think Edward ended up on a lot of kind of lists of worst films ever. So of course, the previously mentioned Plan 9 from Outer Space. It's that genre of so bad it's good, like kind of camp things, and I mean, these, they've been like rerunning these. I mean, I remember seeing Plan 9 from Outer Space in the cinema in the early 90s. So they were like, this kind of revival of these films has been going on for a long time. I mean, as mentioned before, if you don't know much about Edward, watch the Tim Burton film from 1994. It's absolutely wonderful. It's not entirely truthful. It's a fictionalized, biopic, but it kind of gives you the idea. I mean, Edward also made a film about transvestism called Glenn or Glenda.
Yes.
Which is because he was himself a transvestite. He was married. He was not a homosexual. He was of course, the strange category of just cross-dressing man, which has been with us for a very long time. But yeah, Glenn and Glenda is a classic. I mean, the So Bad It's Good films. So, what's another Edward film? Bride of the Monster, which of course has Lugosi actually giving a performance. Lugosi appears in Plan 9 from Outer Space, but it's just old silent footage that Ed Wood shot of Lugosi like picking a rose, and that's it. But actually, Lugosi has lines in Bride of the Monster. Bride of the Monster is a proper film. Yeah, Jailbait is another one. The Sinister Urge. The Sinister Urge is notable because the lead villain looks just like a young Bob Dylan. So,
well, there we are.
Yeah, and Mystery Science Theater did that. In fact, I remember there's a line in that where the Mystery Science Theater crew, that character like puts on a hat and strides off the screen, and one of the robots says, "This looks like a job for Zimmerman." So, anyway, so Ed Wood. Yeah. The thing about these though is that there's, of course, the so bad it's good genre, but Plan 9 is far from the worst film ever made. I mean, I have seen films that are literally unwatchable. So you have to be careful with that worst film thing. Well, there's a whole Seinfeld plot also, that if you remember the famous Chinese restaurant episode of Seinfeld, you remember that one?
Yes, of course.
The whole MacGuffin of that is that they're trying to go to a screening of Plan 9 from Outer Space, which they never make it to. So anyway.
Yeah, I remember I got into stuff like that through a book I had called I sent it to you before the stream started. It's called the Golden Turkey Awards by Harry Medved. Michael Medved. That's it. It was kind of like a homage to these like worst films ever made type thing, many of which were in this sort of genre that we're talking about. But I kind of agree that once you see a few of these, Plan 9 is actually quite innovative compared to
it's a masterpiece.
Yeah.
One of the things that makes that Tim Burton Ed Wood so good is also Bill Murray plays Bunny Breckinridge, who is one of Ed Wood's stable of actors. He was a wealthy heir to some sort of fortune, but he was just a completely camp homosexual. It's absolutely hilarious. Bill Murray's performance of him. Let's hear you call Boris Karloff a cocksucker. Very good.
All right. So I hate to move us on, but I've just I didn't actually realize this, but the Quatermass films were made by Hammer themselves. So
I didn't know that.
They get up and running with the Quatermass experiment in 1955. I always thought it started with Frankenstein in 1957, and then there's Dracula in 58 and The Mummy in 59. So really, they just have their kind of because essentially what the Hammer films do is they basically. Do you think it's fair to say that they basically remake the Universal cycle just again, but mainly starring Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing? I think that's fair to say.
I think that's fair to say. Yeah.
They essentially relaunch Dracula as a franchise, The Mummy as a franchise, Frankenstein as a franchise, and then just start pumping out lots and lots of horror films. There's a kind of hidden early Cushing and Lee outing, which is a Sherlock Holmes movie, The Hound of the Baskervilles. Have you seen that?
Yep.
That is quite good. It reminds me a little bit of you ever seen that what was that bloody horror play that everybody went to watch from the West End for years? Woman in Black. Woman in Black, was it?
Yeah.
If you've ever seen that, when they're out on the marshes and it's really, really misty and things, The Hound of the Baskervilles has got a lot of atmosphere. They're out on the kind of misty moors. But I remember enjoying that. What are your thoughts on Hammer horror, D? just as a general thing?
I mean, it's I think. I mean, a lot of it is really tied up in the figure of Christopher Lee and figures of Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing for so many of those films. But of course, like Quatermass and such, absolute classics. I think in a way, that helped to in a way revive sort of the British film industry at that time. I mean, it was one of the causes of kind of revival of which had once been quite an influential and productive sort of industry. But yeah, I mean, it's very difficult to argue with any of those early Hammer films.
Yeah, I mean, one of the weird things I'm going to say about the Hammer movies is that they're curiously academic in a way. Like they're really concerned with like the archaeology and the kind of they take all of that side of things very seriously, especially like Peter Cushing's characters in general. He tends to be like some sort of academic who, there's usually a scene of like him explaining like core bits of mythology to some NPC,
I wonder what that's all about. I mean, maybe perhaps the Britishness is part of that, and tend to be a little more of a kind of intellectual injection into these things. But
yeah, one of my favorite things to do around this time of year is to try to go into either Cushing or Lee back catalogue and pick out the most obscure film that I haven't seen. I'm just going to make myself watch it. There's some really quite odd things in their back catalogue. Like, I remember one year I watched Horror Express. I think it's from the 70s. It's just like the entire thing is set on a train.
Yeah, it's a train film. Yeah,
it's I don't know. I kind of dig doing that. I mean, it's almost always the case that both of them, Lee and Cushing, are better than whatever the material they're in.
Oh, like yeah. As I said, I think they kind of carry a lot of these.
Sorry, D, go on.
But no, they certainly carry a lot of these. Yeah, they bring. Yeah, the only dignity that some of these films could manage to show off.
Yeah, I mean, what I'll say as a general rule with the Hammer stuff, the early stuff is played very straight, and it's kind of, I mean, I would say that the Dracula, Mummy, and the early Frankenstein films all stand up reasonably well. You may find them a little bit slow in parts. I mean, Lee is often used extremely sparingly in the Dracula movies, like, it's halfway through and you still haven't seen him and things like that. He often takes quite a while to arrive. But I will say that the Hammer movies, as they go on, there starts to be a bit of nookie involved. There's always a bit of like TNA on display. By the like the late 60s, early 70s, there's quite a lot of flesh.
A general trend in film, I would say.
Yeah, they kind of almost become. I mean, the Carry On movies follow a similar trend actually, where they come like semi-pornographic at the end.
Yeah, when you get to Carry On Emmanuel, then
But there's a Hammer equivalent of Carry On Emmanuel. Lust for a Vampire and things like that. But
yeah, I mean they made a few weird sort of comedy films as well. Hammer did.
All right, so we're still in the 1950s, believe it or not. Are you able to select a film for the decade, a horror film for the decade?
Boy, that's a tough one. That's a very tough one.
Oh, there's one. Okay, hold on a second. There's one horror film from the 50s that is very highly rated by a lot of people and is one of my more controversial views that I'm not into it. And that is the Night of the Hunter. Now, Charles Lawton directed it. Stars Robert Mitchum. it's kind of surreal. It's got like dream imagery in it. Remember, he's got like love and hate on his knuckles, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
That is a highly raved about movie, which I have never rated. So, The Night of the Hunter would be many people's pick for the horror film of the 50s, but
the other thing, of course, we're maybe avoiding is Alfred Hitchcock. I mean, a lot of those came in the 60s, but I do wonder, where such films like
they're kind of thrillers, I would say.
Kind of thrillers. Like, well, I'm thinking most of Psycho. Was that 19?
No,
was that
I
in
think
the
Psycho
60s?
was 60s. 64,
yeah.
I want to say, maybe.
Was it that late?
I think Psycho's late. I could be wrong though. Yeah, 1960. Sorry, 1960. So
1960. Yeah, right.
Psycho belongs to the next decade, just about.
Okay, all right.
So, and the Birds as well.
Of course, yeah.
And I would say they're really Hitchcock does suspense movies, and his only real horror movies are Psycho, The Birds, and Frenzy. I would argue. I don't know if anybody wants to disagree with me on that, but
yeah,
there's a line between suspense, thriller, and horror, I would say.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think Psycho certainly fits, though.
So we still need a horror film for the 50s. We haven't got that.
God's sake. Okay. Oh, God, how about I'll go with the Day the Earth Stood Still, because it's very iconic, I don't know, Day of the Triffids, is that 50? I don't know. There's so many films.
A lot of these lists that I'm looking at are classing The Seventh Seal as a horror film. I don't accept that.
No.
It's not a horror film.
No. The Seventh Seal isn't a horror film. Not at all.
Ridiculous claim.
Stupid. I mean, in fact, if you were to pick a Bergman film, I think Cries and Whispers is much more of a horror film. I mean, it's not a horror film, but if you're going to pick one, it's going to be that. It's certainly not going to be The Seventh Seal. Ridiculous. Maybe because death is a character. I don't know. That's a stupid justification.
I'm struggling with a lot of the earlier 50s. I'm gonna have to pick one of the Hammer movies.
Oh, Hour of the Wolf, someone mentioned. Yeah, I forgot about that one. That's a Bergman film. Serpent's Egg.
I might go with the Hammer version of The Mummy from 1959.
Ooh, controversial.
Can't really. I don't know. I mean, it's not that representative of the 50s, but I mean, let's be honest. A lot of those movies aren't very good.
No, they're not. They're not. I mean, we're gonna really get on. We're gonna get onto it. We're gonna hit the decades where we're gonna have a lot of difficulty choosing just one. So.
Yeah. But now we have difficulty choosing just one. All right. So you're sticking with that then?
I'm just going to go with that. I have no other. I don't know what else to choose. So.
Okay. All right. So let's move on now to the 60s, where I would say the genre really starts to find its feet in terms of movies that are still very good, I would say. I.e., they retain their ability to frighten. I mean, there are a lot of good horror movies in the 1960s. Shall we? I mean, given that we just started talking about Hitchcock, I mean, what about Psycho? I have a few controversial views about this movie, but
okay. Well, yeah. All right. Well, I'll give my views about Psycho. I mean, Psycho is an absolute masterpiece until the end, in which I think that Hitchcock basically totally ruins the film. I won't give away why in case people haven't seen this, but it basically I don't know, because there's certainly scholarly opinion that, of course, that the whole explanation given at the end was intended to be ironic. I don't know, but I think that certainly it's difficult to argue that there are so many cinematic tropes that were established by Psycho, and that so many subsequent films, you know, I mean, it also sort of, it not really invented, but it certainly popularized a kind of I mean, you know, literal psychological, the idea of a madman as a monster, you know, the kind of, you know, insane character as the, you know, as the antagonist, and also the horror of the everyday. I mean, that is something that Hitchcock did very well. I mean, there's almost something quite surrealist about that, you know, that of all the various ways that, you know, he can make certain objects, you know, the idea of taking a bath or shower, you know, turn that daily domestic ritual into something, you know, unsettling, you know, into something that gave people legitimate fear when they did it after seeing that film. And there's something quite sinister and wonderful about that, you know. And he does it in other things too, you know. He does it with like a carousel or a glass of milk, you know, in other horror, other Hitchcock films. So yeah, I do think that it's a very important film for that reason, and there's some wonderful cinematography, but I do think that it is really hindered by the ending. What are your thoughts about this?
I'm basically with you on everything that you said. I just think that the ending is just it's just horrible. And it kind of I don't know, it kind of undoes a lot of the movie for me. But
it really does. I mean, let's just say there's a psychiatrist at the end.
Oh, it's just hideous. It really is hideous.
It's really awful. Really awful.
But also, like, knowing a man of Hitchcock's sensibilities and so on, it's hard to imagine like why he put that in as well. I mean, because Hitchcock has got some wonderful. I always remember the end of I think it's Dial M for Murder, where that guy just takes out he just takes out a comb and starts like combing his moustache, and the film ends. Like, that is the best film ending of all time. And yet Psycho is probably the worst film ending of all time. So
I mean, yeah, and Hitchcock has so many. I mean, Vertigo. I mean, the way, even like the Birds, which we'll talk about in a bit, I suppose. But even the way that ends, I mean, they're brilliantly done. Well, that's why I think there's, you know, as I said, I've read some criticism where there's literally like people desperately trying to cling to the idea that ending of Psycho was some sort of ironic turn, which I don't think is true. Difficult to say. It also could have. I don't know if maybe it was a contrivance of the films. You know, the film studio. You know, the studio ruined it.
It could have been like some Hays Code thing or whatever. You know, too scary if you don't explain it to the idiot's tone type thing.
Yeah, but you know, I think it's quite clear that it didn't need it. You know, that, I mean, it worked, and everyone understood it. You know. And that's another thing, of course, that film does so well, and then Hitchcock does very well, is the kind of synergy between the imagery and the soundtrack. You know, I mean, that's become a kind of cliche. The Bernard Herrmann, you know, reep reep reep, that whole thing. That all comes from a scene in Psycho.
Well, I watched a film the other night. It was called. It starred Oliver Reed and Karen Black. What was the name of that film?
I love Oliver Reed.
Oliver, right? Burnt Offerings from 1970.
Oh, Burnt Offerings! Yes,
right, yeah.
I've seen that.
Right, now, I watched that the other night because I was doing my thing of trying to find obscure, like, you know, whack in Christopher Lee into Amazon Prime and see what comes up. Well, for whatever reason, that came up. I was like, okay, well, it's not Christopher Lee, but let's just, you know, Oliver Reed.
It's a Hammer film, isn't it?
Is it Hammer film? I don't think so.
Okay.
I tell you who
I mean, Oliver Reed was in a bunch of Hammer films, so I don't know.
I tell you who is in that movie is Betty Davis,
Yeah.
who's actually doing rather quite like surprisingly well in this tournament that I'm running on Twitter. But anyway,
Oh, and Benny turns up in the '60s in a horror film. I will tell you.
oh yes, we'll talk about that in a second. Also, Burgess Meredith is in it. You know, the Penguin for Batman. But anyway, that film and many, many, many others like it would not exist without Psycho. I'm just saying there are so many random knockoff Psycho movies.
Yep.
From in the 60s and 70s. I mean, they really did a lot of those tropes into the ground. I mean, I don't want to give away the ending of either Psycho or Burnt Offerings.
No.
But, you know.
Yeah. And into the '80s, and of course, even I mean, even the whole idea of a woman who has just sinned, which the character of Janet Leigh does in the film, who is then vulnerable, who is then made vulnerable in a sexualized way, and then at that vulnerability is basically punished. And if you think of any '80s film where like groups of teenagers are menaced by some sort of freakish character, like all the Friday the 13th films, Nightmare on Elm Street. I mean, so many films basically replay that trope. Basically, we're going to make out, and then the female will be, will be pursued in a state of undress and then murdered. So yeah, I think even that became an oft-repeated trope.
Although I tell you something. Difference between Psycho and most horror movies, right? Because a lot of horror movies are just kind of begging them to just like leave the house or
get out of there.
Don't go upstairs or whatever.
Don't go in there.
Right? There's a lot, and in fact, Burnt Offerings had an awful lot of that. Just fucking leave. Like, what are you doing? Anyway, Psycho does one of those bold ththings, and I hesitate to talk about spoilers, but it is 2022. And if you haven't watched Psycho by now, you need to sort your life out. But the fact the main character is killed off like pretty quickly is quite a bold thing.
Yeah.
That isn't actually copied that often. Can't think of many other movies that do it actually.
Game of Thrones.
apart from Game of Thrones, exactly. Apart from Game of Thrones, there's very few movies that have had the guts to do that. So yes. Anyway, and the 60s movies, horror movies,
so many.
I mean, still in 1960, what about the Powell and Michael Powell movie, Peeping Tom?
Oh, Peeping Tom, yeah.
Another British horror, kind of creepy, voyeuristic, kind of like almost like Rear Window done as a horror, if you want to put it that way. There's a lot of interesting stuff to do, like if you want to get proper, like there's interesting things to do with the mise en scène and the gaze of the camera in that movie, which film critics love to talk about.
Indeed.
What are the ones from the 60s?
Well, okay, I'll give you one starring your favorite, George Sanders, which is called Village of the Damned.
Oh yes, yeah, good movie,
which is quite an unsettling film. That also, I would say, that also introduced another trope that's become very commonplace with horror, which is the children turned into monsters. The idea of a kind of innocent child becoming a figure of evil. I mean, Stephen King, half of his career is based upon that trope, and it was used many times in the 50s. I mean, certainly there's a famous American television series called Twilight Zone. Which,
yes, do you know my brother, by the way, was one of the original YouTube uploaders of Twilight Zone. His channel's been taken down now, obviously, but like he had thousands and thousands of subs as a Twilight Zone uploader.
Amazing.
Yeah. So I've watched a lot of Twilight Zone, which has got that kind of curious mix of tail end of upbeat 40s man, but also like the slightly earnest moralizer. If that makes any sense. There's quite a lot of earnest moralizing in in Twilight Zone.
Yeah, I mean, and actually, like literal moralizing, because Rod Serling like literally tells you the moral at the end. So,
Yes.
and like I'll tell you, like so many Twilight Zone episodes, they follow a very similar formula. I mean, the one that I feel like it was Burgess Meredith as well, maybe not. I mean, there's a famous one where there's a man who likes to read, and he's just constantly annoyed by the fact that his reading is interrupted by the interjections of various people, and so he like wishes that he was alone on the earth so that he could read. And there's like a he is I don't remember if there's like a nuclear holocaust, or if maybe he just like wakes up and everyone is gone. Something happened. So again, like many Twilight Zone episodes, there's a character who wishes for something, or who kind of manifests some sort of idea, and then
Yes.
that idea is kind of given to them as a punishment. It's a very old trope in moral tales.
There's a lot of that. There's one where this guy is released from prison, and he's like, "Oh, I wish I could just win sometimes. I wish I could just win." And then everything he does, he wins. Like he puts a coin in the slot machine, wins the jackpot, like just wins everything. And obviously the moral is that this is his own personal version of hell. That it's just hell on earth to always win without any effort. So
I'm going to spoil that one with the guy who likes to read, because of course everyone dies and he's alone on earth. He can read all he wants, and then he breaks his glasses.
Yeah, my brother loves that episode, and therefore he forced me to watch it as well. Okay. I think it is. I think it's a young Burgess Meredith. He kind of plays like a wormy. He's like a kind of
he's a wormy library cat. Yeah, sort of bookworm. It's called Time Enough for Once, I believe, that episode. So anyway, they're all like that. There's one that I haven't seen in a long time that really disturbed me, and there's like a small boy. Again, back into that genre of the evil child, who can sort of wish people away, and like if you irritate him, he wishes you away, and you go into this like cornfield in another dimension. It's quite horrible. There's something quite horrible about it. So anyway, yeah.
I would also say about 50% of all Twilight Zone episodes and about 50% of 60s horror movies start with a couple driving in the country. that is a very well-worn trope in the 1960s. There's been an accident,
Well, and then of course we get into the territory which you covered long ago with the Southern film, the Southern.
Oh yes, the Southern thing, yes.
Thing, which
I just want to mention a couple of really kind of. There's one very deep 60s cut that people don't think of very often when it comes to 60s horror. There's a film called Carnival of Souls.
Yes, I was going to say it's one of my favorite films of the decade.
I've got a. I mean, it's some of the gifts from it. You can see this fellow here. That is such a strange film. It is
incredible film.
Kind of different. Just hits different. Let's just say.
Yeah.
Obviously, this is made in 1962. Yep. I don't know if it was because of the low budget or there's something otherworldly about this one. That is a kind of hidden gem of the 60s. I don't know if it's my favorite horror film of the 60s. I just want to give it an honorable mention.
It's one of my favorites. I mean, there is something genuinely unsettling about it, and Carnival, and it was an independent film. I mean, that which and it's certainly rare. I mean, we will of course get into that later with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I mean, that became another thing. The sort of the idea of an independent horror. But yeah, that's it was proper early guerrilla filmmaking. Low budget independent feature, and I think part of that is what makes it very weird. There's a very weird vibe to that. But I certainly picked that as one of my favorite films, and I think it was quite influential to a lot of people. I remember David Lynch talking about it a lot. So,
yeah. While we're on the subject of kind of, I mean, there's a lot to pick from in the 60s. I'm jumping around all over the place, but what about Polanski's Repulsion?
Oh, yeah, Repulsion.
That's kind of a psychological horror, I would argue.
Yeah, and certainly Polanski enters the list a couple of times. And then becomes a horror, and then becomes a horror himself.
Yeah, I mean, what about the other Polanski, Rosemary's Baby?
Rosemary's Baby, is that 60s? Is that
68? Yeah, 68.
68, yeah. Oh yes, and certainly again that's a very unsettling movie as well. Mia Farrow, young Mia
Farrow, yeah.
Also strangely lives at the building where it all takes place, is the Dakota apartment building, which is where John and Yoko lived and where John Lennon was killed, outside the Dakota.
Wow. Is Mia Farrow the one who is that the same one who marries Woody Allen later on?
Yeah, that's the same one who
and then is it true like Woody Allen then went out with their daughter or something? Is that true?
He had enough. Yeah, well, so Mia Farrow, she collects children. I mean, she's done that for a long time. She's got like, I don't know, she adopted like 15 children or something, lots and lots of children.
All right.
Many like foreign children. One of those.
I see.
Sort of people. And she and Woody were together, and their relationship was ended basically because she found out that he was having dalliance with one of her adopted children called Suni Previn. So Mia Farrow was also married to Frank Sinatra before that, and then to Andre Previn, the orchestra conductor. So yeah, very odd tale. And Woody Allen is still married to Suni Previn, to the daughter. But yeah.
Sorry to jump around as much as I'm jumping around, D, but there's a lot of random 60s stuff I want to mention. There's one of my favorite off. So obviously there's Hammer horror, everybody knows, but then there were off Hammer British horror movies like Seven Art Productions and Amicus and people like that. Well, one of them is a film I caught late one night on BBC Two, which I've never forgotten. It stars Roddy McDowall. It's called It. Just It! Exclamation mark. Right.
I think I've seen that.
He's like a museum curator, and a golem comes to life. I'll just show you some screen grabs of it. Yeah, so this is It. There's Roddy McDowall. Not a particularly great movie, but it's just the sort of thing that I kind of have enjoyed catching, on an odd rainy Sunday night or something. They randomly stick stuff on TV. So I just wanted to mention there's tons of films like that in the 60s too. I really think the horror starts to come into its own a little bit, because you can get kind of, if you were to make like a list of the top 50 horror movies of the 60s, maybe It is not making the top 30 or something, but it's still like worth watching. So yes. Any others
from the 60s? Oh god.
There are tons.
There are tons.
Wait, what about Night of the Living Dead?
Night of the Living Dead, of course.
I would argue that, we'd have to think about whether Freaks is an S tier movie, but I argue that the original Night of the Living Dead from '68 is an S tier horror film. It's an all timer. It introduces a lot of tropes that become very well worn in the zombie genre. But the whole thing of those movies is that the horror is not the zombies. The horror is within. Horror is within the. And what I like about Night of the Living Dead is it's one of the few films where none of the main characters are sympathetic in any way. Like they're all like that. I think there's like a black guy and but they're all like monstrously selfish, and the very thought of heroism is kind of thought about, and then they kind of reason themselves out of it. And I find the Night of the Living Dead is really well done. And unlike, I'm going to upset a lot of horror fans here, but I don't actually like George A. Romero's later works. I just think he loses it from Dawn of the Dead. Or I don't like the later, Dead movies. But I think Night of the Living Dead is a stone cold classic. So it's probably going to be my pick of the 60s. But I have to mention it. Any others?
Oh, so many others.
What about the Bette Davis one? Whatever happened to Baby Jane?
Whatever happened to Baby Jane with Bette
scary,
Davis,
isn't it?
Bette Davis and Joan Crawford. Yes, a terrifying film. I mean, Bette Davis is that's quite a performance that she turns in that. And
she's
also, of course,
she's a lot better in that than she is in what's that, Burnt Offerings.
Oh yeah, well that was strangely enough, of course, Joan Crawford's last film was a 70s horror film called Trog, about like troglodytes, about like prehistoric. Oh God, and that's her last film, Joan Crawford as well.
It's funny. I grew up in a town that was a tourist town. Still is a tourist town, and Trogs was our name for the holiday makers that came down in the summer and things. We always used to call them Trogs. So special place in my heart.
Did you burn down any holiday homes? Were you
no,
responsible for that?
No, we just tended to try to avoid them. That's all. Any other? See, the thing is, there's so many. There's also the start of the the portmanteau horrors, like we mentioned Dead of Night. But the sort of films that Amicus put out, where it was 4 short stories, and there's Dr. Terror's House of Horrors.
Yeah.
But that's a Cushing and Lee outing that you could catch, and there's a young Donald Sutherland in it. I was gonna, if I ever went on Proper Horror Show, I was gonna pick one of these Amicus portmanteau films. There's one from the 70s called Asylum with smoking hot Charlotte Rampling in it. So
okay.
I kind of like those kind of anthology movies. They're never that brilliant, but they're fun to watch on a rainy night.
Indeed. So a couple of other things about the 60s. I think the 60s saw the foray into the genre of ghosts, which was curiously absent, I think, in earlier films. Ghosts were not like strict ghost stories were not really done in film. Maybe because certainly there may be technical reasons for that, but yeah, the 60s saw a great foray into the ghost. There was another thing, of course, so it was also the kind of rise of international films of this nature. So of course many of the what do they call them, kaiju, Japanese monster films were late 50s, early 60s productions, and many of those they're wonderful. I mean, they're quite camp in a certain way, but you can watch all the Gamera and Mothra and Godzilla, and
there's another trend in the 60s as well. I don't know how exactly to describe it. So you've got the ghost thing that you mentioned, right? Which is, as you say, oddly absent from the earlier periods. Yes, you have the zombie genre starts to get going as well.
Yeah.
But you also have how can I put, like, the satanic theme, I guess, or that really starts getting going in the 60s.
And really hits a peak towards the end of the 60s. I don't know. I mean, I'm tempted, of course, to sometimes see the emergence of these themes as kind of manifestations of things that were going on in the culture, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, you know, that as you know, there was a rise in interest in occult subjects of all sorts in the 60s. So it may have been something to do with that. Lots of and also, I mean, overt sex mixed with violence and horror is something that,
well, in fact, a lot of the nookie in the Hammer movies you'd get in in the Satanic Ritual, of course, because you know they'd strip her down, and you know, maybe Christopher Lee would have some sort of dagger ready to do the ritual, you know.
So many things like that. Oh, and of course Polanski. I mean, you know, he you know, think of his other, like, the Fearless Vampire Killers, which is a 60s outing as well.
Now that I think of it, some of the very best Hammer films are devil related, like The Devil Rides Out. Have you seen that one? Seen The Devil Rides Out, or Witchfinder General? That's a Vincent Price.
Witchfinder General, yeah. Vincent, but the 60s, of course, was the decade of Vincent Price.
I mean, there were four. They call them the Big Four of the. So if the 30s ones were Karloff, Lugosi, and Lon Chaney Jr. The 60s Big Four, I think, in like horror circles, is obviously Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, Vincent Price, and John Carradine is often put in there as the fourth.
Yeah, John Carradine.
He was in films like The Astro Zombies.
Indeed, there's a really disturbing Carradine film called, was it called The Unearthly, which is quite boring and plodding and silly, but it has a very nasty, weird turn at the end. That's one. But Carradine as well.
I think it's just fun reading John Carradine turns, right? Curse of the Stone Hand, The Wizard of Mars, Psycho a Go-Go, Black Death. I mean, just Tarzan the Magnificent.
Speaking of a go-go, one of the worst films ever made is a film called Monster a Go-Go from the 1960s. I mean, we're talking about the difference between like so bad it's good and so bad that you can't watch it.
That's bad.
And I would say that film, Monster a Go-Go, is one of the worst films. Also, the 60s. I mean, speaking of Mystery Science Theater, the 60s also saw Manos: The Hand of Fate being made, which was an independent film made by a manure salesman, which was never shown until it appeared on Mystery Science Theater. So, strangely enough, but that's a 60s film. What
was that really? Was it 10,000 Maniacs or
10,000 Maniacs? Which was
that 60, the
64, 65? Yeah, that's
2000 Maniacs.
2000 Maniacs. Yeah, not 10. So 10,000 Maniacs is the group with Natalie Merchant from the 90s, but 2000 Maniacs.
Well, that director, Herschel Gordon Lewis, I think, is responsible for Monster a Go-Go.
Yes, he is one of the people responsible for Monster a Go-Go. I mean, Monster a Go-Go. Let me just give you an idea of one of the reasons why it's bad is that they lost the soundtrack. So they filmed the movie. And they lost the actual voice, the dialogue recordings. So they had to kind of like do it in post. But of course, and that's common in films to re-record dialogue, but not in the way they did it for this. Anyway, I challenge you, not the Mystery Science Theater, but get a regular version of Monster Go-Go and try to make it through that without killing yourself. God. Let me think of any Dementia 13. That is one of Francis Ford Coppola's first film, and that is that's quite something. Yeah, it was his first film. It was his first feature film, and produced by Roger Corman. Strangely enough, so.
Would you agree, Dee, that the 60s has been the richest of the the decades that we've looked at so far in terms of. I say that fully acknowledging that I have not watched the 8 million 1940s horror films that were listed, but
comedy horror films. Yeah.
But I mean, it seems to me that there's I don't know, like we're reaching a point where the genre's got to know itself. It's been through one of these cycles of self-awareness. It's come out the other side with a new burst of energy, and I feel like it's got some real strength and depth here, to the point where we have to think about what is the best horror of the 60s. I already know what I'm picking, but what are you going to pick?
Well, quickly before we go that, I said we would mention The Birds, which was, I think, 1960,
oh yes, The Birds, yeah,
63 or 64. That is a very weird film, Birds. I mean, first of all, one of the things that makes The Birds so creepy, I think, is that Hitchcock made, I think, the bold decision to have no music. There is no music in that film. There may be diegetic music at some point. Someone may have the radio on, I don't know, but there's no soundtrack. I mean, there's no musical soundtrack. A lot of the bird noises were actually made with early analog synthesizers, so there's a very weird kind of quality to the sounds, but it's all sounds, all diegetic sounds. You see the source of the sound on the screen. And there's just something about the atmosphere of that film that is really, really weird. Disney helped with that film. Disney actually did the Disney company. Walt was still alive at that point, I suppose.
I didn't know that, actually.
Yeah, they animated some of the birds. There's some process shots where you see the birds fly. You see the birds flying after people. You see them, and they were superimposed, and they were animated, by Disney Studios. And there's some really, really interesting technical stuff there. But it's something. That film is quite something.
I remember my mother was terrified of The Birds and wouldn't, like, if it ever came on or whatever, she wouldn't allow it to be on. So
a lot of people were quite, and again, it's another instance of Hitchcock making horror out of innocence, making, corrupting a perfectly normal thing and turning it into a source of absolute terror. And the one thing that I love about that film is that there's no explanation ever given.
For what's actually happening.
You never, there's no even attempt to figure it out.
Maybe he learned from Psycho.
In fact, they don't even. I mean, there's no even plausible explanation given in the film. There's no kind of talk of any kind of, there's no radiation. There's no, it just happens, and there's something wonderful about that. I love The Birds, and I love so many of those decisions. But and I have a fondness for films that have no musical score. I think that it's a difficult thing to do, but when it works, it gives them a certain atmosphere. So anyway.
Yeah, in fact, I'm just looking through. There's so many movies in the 60s. Have you seen The Haunting from 1963?
Yes.
It's good.
Good. I mean, again, another one of those the sort of 60s ghost films. Yeah.
Yeah, again, like haunted house, ghost idea. I'm just having a look now at I mean, you could probably spend the rest of the stream just listing the films that Christopher Lee was in alone in the 60s. Good, bad, and ugly, I would say. There's
in the bad category, I would mention that he played Fu Manchu in a number of films.
There is that. Trying to think of all right, so are we ready to?
Not only that, but he played Fu Manchu in a film. In one of those films was directed by Jess Franco, and anyone who knows bad horror will know Jess Franco.
Are you ready, Dee, to name your horror of the 60s?
I'm not, but I'll let you go first.
I think I have to choose Night of the Living Dead for the reasons I outlined already. But I would say the competition is quite stiff for this decade.
Yeah, it's very, very stiff. Boy. Oh dear, oh dear.
I like the Witchfinder General too.
Yeah. I'm just picking random ones. I'm gonna pick I'll pick The Birds since I talked about that one the most, but I don't know. It's just a random pick.
Excellent.
I couldn't say because as you say, there's just too many. And now we go on to a decade where there's even more good ones.
Yeah, I mean, this is, the horror decade, I would say.
The horror decade
is the 70s. Because, yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on. We haven't really talked much about directors, by the way. We probably should have mentioned in the 60s, as well as Hitchcock, one of the big Hammer directors called Terence Fisher. Roger Corman does something. He was still around. That dude, that 2000 Maniacs dude, what's his name again? Herschel Gordon Lewis. Like, he was banging out. Like, when I say bang out, I mean like 5 films a year type thing.
Yeah.
But there were a few. George A. Romero becomes a horror great, of course.
Yeah.
Polanski. I'm just saying there are a few, notable directors whose movies we discussed. But anyway, yes. Now we're coming on to the decade of the auteur and arguably the decade of horror. So let's where shall we start with the 70s?
That's 1970.
I tell you what I might do is that Wikipedia's got these lists of horror movies per year. So I'm just gonna pull up 1970 and scroll through until
I'll do the same
until
thing.
something jumps out at me, because there's so many. Let's have a look.
Okay, I'm looking at 1970. There's a lot of film with blood in the title.
Yeah, I drink your blood. Horror of the blood monsters.
Well, there's Jess Franco doing the Bloody Judge.
I tell you what else this reminds me of, right? Once you start getting into the darker archives of Christopher Lee's career, he has this kind of weird Italian, like, parallel career where, as well as making Hammer horror, and sometimes he makes movies in the States, but there were quite a lot of Italian film. Like, everybody thinks of the spaghetti westerns, right? But there was also like spaghetti horror, and Christopher Lee's in quite a lot of them. And
those Italian films. When I was saying about the kind of rise of foreign film, I was thinking of Spanish and Italian films, because there's so many Italian films, especially.
There's Trog, starring Joan Crawford.
Yeah, there it is. Her last film, Trog.
The Wizard of Gore by Herschel Gordon. So maybe 1970, not actually the best year. So let's carry on.
No, there's some. I'm just looking through the. Oh God! So Christopher Lee did another turn as Dracula, except with Jesus Franco, Jess Franco.
Yeah.
Christopher Lee and Klaus Kinski. Not his best work.
I've moved on to 71 now.
I'm still looking at there's another Jess Franco film called with Christopher Lee and Maria Rom, called Eugenie: The Story of Her Journey into Perversion. Oh God. Okay, I'll move to 71 because there's not a lot to talk about in 70.
Well, jumping out at me straight away, D, is a film that we briefly discussed. Notable for the fact that I've not been able to watch it in basically 30 years at this point. And that is The Devils by Ken Russell, starring Oliver Reed and Vanessa Redgrave.
Yes.
Now that was much raved about. It was banned for many years.
Yeah.
And always discussed on like late night Channel 4 stuff with Mark Cousins and so on. But I never got around to watching it. I still haven't watched it to this day. I know our young friend Columba doesn't like it, but what about The Devils?
Well, Columba's always, but The Devils, you should certainly watch. I mean, Ken Russell I mean, familiar with some of his films like Listomania and amongst others. But yes, The Devils is certainly worth watching. It's not good. It's not great. I have many problems with it, and it's quite profane and revolting in many ways. I had a brief connection many years ago to the person who did the art direction for that film, called Derek Jarman.
Yes.
But yeah, Oliver Reed and communist Vanessa Redgrave, and there's some really spurious material about Catholicism in that film as
Isn't
well.
it just like buggery with nuns? I seem to recall.
It's far worse. It's far worse than you could ever imagine. But you should absolutely watch it because it's a complete classic. Of course, someone in the chat loves it. Yeah, he loves it.
Yeah, I mean, it's always been on my to-do list, but I've just never got around to it.
Yeah,
as sometimes happens, Also listed here, I would question this categorization, but Steven Spielberg, who I actually think is overrated and is a subversive in many ways, but my favorite Spielberg movie is listed here. It's Duel.
Duel, really?
I love it. I love Duel. The psychopathic massive lorry that just chases.
Yeah,
just like one long chase sequence. I love that movie.
Yeah, I wouldn't really call that I wouldn't call that a horror film either.
Suspense thriller, I would say, but
yeah,
it's listed here for some reason.
Oh my God, Michael Winner's The Nightcomers. You've seen that?
Winner? No, I haven't. No, it's starring Marlon Brando.
Yeah, with Brando is in that one. Yeah.
I haven't seen that one. Sounds awesome. Michael Winner and Brando. What a amazing combination of talents.
So another big one in this list is Straw Dogs.
Straw Dogs, yeah.
Sam Peckinpah. Very dark film. Yeah.
I mean, it's notable. It's notable for the rape scene where it's suggested that she starts enjoying it, basically.
Yeah.
Peckinpah, an interesting masculine director, I would say. Peckinpah.
Yeah. Yeah. Certainly. The Wild.
That's a rough film. Straw Dogs is rough.
It's and I think you certainly by the 60s to the 70s you start getting films that are like really. There's certain films in the 70s and 80s onward that I would caution people because there are films that will pollute you, as you like to say about Salo, that will pollute your soul, which also may be mentioned as a horror film of some description.
Of the 1970s, yeah, indeed. Yeah. Does Salo count? I would say it's a horror film.
Oh, I would say, yeah, absolutely a horror film. Yeah.
Well, I've got to 72. Asylum. I mentioned.
Sorry. I need to point out Willard.
I did see Willard. Yeah.
Yeah, the film. Yeah, Willard about rats. Yeah. It just it's the Voldemort Zelensky story. Is that film?
In 72, I mentioned Asylum. It's just it's got various hotties in it, like Britt Eklund, and it also has a turn from one of my favorites, the Patrick McGee. I love any film that Patrick McGee crops up in. I love.
Well, of course, famously, I think of him as he does a big turn in Barry Lyndon Kubrick film. So
and Clockwork Orange, of course.
Clockwork Orange, even worse.
And he's in
Wine.
And he's in the William Friedkin birthday party as well. He plays McCann,
which is great, which is wonderful. I still want to do our deep lore reading of the birthday party with Party.
Yeah. I tell you what, right? Asylum, Rampling crops up. I mean, it's got Peter Cushing in it. It's got Christopher Lee in it. I mean, what a cast, eh? I mean, they're not all in the same scene at the same time, but Robert Powell's in it. Literally Jesus. Sorry.
There's so many. Yeah, and I would say that the whole the genre of like filthy erotic blood horror really comes into its own in this. There's so many. I mean, there's a lot of it's sort of British, Italian co-productions where like people like Penny Irving, these old like page 6, girls.
Yeah.
Or like tortured by lesbian nuns and such. There's a lot of that material that comes around.
It's especially amazing when they can't act for toffee as well. It's just like random model. Never acted again in life.
Yeah,
there's a film that interests me here, Dee, speaking of Italian productions, called "Don't Torture a Duckling." Now, what on earth is that? I'm looking at the screenshots now, and it looks horrific. I want to know what that film is about.
It's a giallo. Yeah, so a lot of these Italian films, they're called giallos. Plot follows a series of child murders in an insular village. There's so many films. There's so many of these weird Italian films like this. I'm going to watch that one. I've never seen it.
Don't Torture a Duckling. It looks amazing.
I'm going to watch Don't Torture a Duckling because it looks atrocious. Oh, also notable for we had Willard with the rat. There's a film called Frogs, which was made in 1972, which is about killer frogs. And
D, I'm appalled to see something. You were mentioning Franco.
Yeah.
The Erotic Experiences of Frankenstein, starring Dennis Price.
No,
what was Dennis Price doing? Starring in that. And it's right at the end of his career as well. Right at the end of his career.
Just bad for it. I mean, what was Joan Crawford doing in Trog? I mean, there was some real desperation. Poor
old Dennis Price, starring in a Franco movie called The Erotic Experience. It doesn't even have a Wikipedia entry. That's how bad it is.
Wow.
What about Frenzy? Have you ever seen that? Hitchcock.
Yes. Yeah, Frenzy's an interesting one. I mean, that's one of the late period Hitchcock.
Pretty much his last film, isn't
it? People don't talk about it. Yeah, is it F for Fake? Is that his last? No, Frenzy might be his last. I'd have to check. Oh, Night of the Lepus, which is about killer rabbits. Yeah. God's sake.
There's that Horror Express I mentioned.
Oh, Horror Express. There.
That stars Kojak, of course, is in that movie, as well as Lee and Cushing. The whole film takes place on the train.
On a train.
You think, it's going to go somewhere. No, it doesn't.
Well, you've got, then you've got, of course, Hitchcock did a wonderful film, which is a lot of it is set on a train, which also has a sinister crypto homosexual in it. That Strangers on a Train. Great film. What else do we have? 73.
That's another one. Tales of the Crypt is another kind of anthology movie. Yeah. 73.
No, hang on, wait.
You want 73 or 72 still?
No, I'm still. Let me get to the end of 72. I can't believe that Orson Welles was in a Burt I. Gordon film. What were you doing? Okay, we'll move to 73. What do we got here? Now the screaming starts with Patrick Magee and Peter Cushing.
Now that's an automatic must watch on the basis that Patrick Magee is in it. And it's a Peter Cushing. And it's an anthology movie. Amazing. Amazing. And I'm watching that tonight. And now the screaming starts, starring Patrick Magee and Peter Cushing.
Here's another one you want to catch. Blackenstein. And that is exactly what you think it is.
Was that a blaxploitation horror movie?
Yes, it is. It's an early blaxploitation entry there.
Look another Lee and Cushing vehicle, The Creeping Flesh.
Ooh.
You see, this is the most amazing thing about those two. No matter how many you watch, there's always
another one.
There's always a deeper cut somewhere. I haven't seen this one either. The Creeping Flesh. It looks amazing too. It's got a skeleton in it.
That's always a sign of quality. That's always a sign of quality. And of course, the big one of the big ones is of The Exorcist was 1973.
Yeah, no, just before we get there, D, you skipped over Don't Look Now.
Oh, yeah.
Which I didn't realize until looking at this is another Italian co-production.
Yeah. There were a lot of these. And of course, it's Don't Look Now is based upon a short story by Daphne du Maurier, who also wrote the short story which The Birds was based on. So.
Now, I have to mention this. Nicholas Rose, a director we've mentioned during the Bowie streams because he did The Man Who Fell to Earth. I've talked about how much I love Performance before, even though I went to a screening of it where all my friends walked out halfway through the film.
Which is really, I mean, the idea that anyone could walk out on Performance, so good.
So I like Nicholas Roeg, right? I don't dislike him as a director, and I like horror movies, as we've been talking about. I do not like. I am the only film fan in the world who does not like Don't Look Now.
Really?
I really dislike it. I don't like anything about it really. But I especially dislike the sex scene, the milky, cloying, nauseating sex scenes of Don't Look Now. I fucking hate the movie.
Milky.
So I know it has a really big reputation, but I don't know what you think.
I mean, it's been a long time since I've seen it, but I don't remember it being so objectionable. But maybe, I mean, Donald Sutherland, of course, who reappears in a big horror film later in the 70s, sci-fi horror film, which is the remake of The Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Yes. All right, The Exorcist then.
The Exorcist. I mean,
this was another film, D, that my mother was so frightened of she wouldn't have it on. If I wanted to watch it, she'd be like, "No, I have to hide." So it was it was built up in a very big way by my mother when I was little. But it is another, in my view, S tier horror movie.
Oh, absolutely. And I'll probably pick it as my film of the 70s because that just an almost perfect film, I would say. And your mother is not alone, because I think this is another one of those films that had such a deep impact on people that it really did scar a lot of people who saw it, and a lot of people wouldn't see it because of its reputation. It gets so many things about that genre, the kind of possession, demonic possession. I mean, it sets up a lot of those tropes as well, but the sort of demon possession angle, and the corruption of an innocent child. The child is as monster.
It also strikes me, D, as one of the few. I say few films, but there's not that many major films that come out of Hollywood that take Christianity seriously. They don't try to undermine or mock the religion. Which I actually think gives it an extra gravitas,
extra power as well. I think because it doesn't do that, and in specifically Catholicism, because it's just as much about Father Merrin as it is about the kind of horror element. It's just as much about his particular brokenness and his strangely enough, his redemption occurs at the end of that film. I would say his redemption as a character, because as I said, a lot of that film is about his brokenness and his inability to grasp what a true commitment to the church actually means for him, and what the sacrifices that being a true priest also require. And there are so many undercurrents in that film that we could talk about. I mean, you could certainly do a whole stream about that. And also I would say that that central to the girl, Reagan, as she's called in the film, Linda Blair, I think it's also a strange allegory for the awakening sexuality, for puberty. I mean, I think that is deeply implied, and there's some really horrible scenes where that's made quite self-evident, which I won't even talk about.
I was just going to say that the actual exorcism itself is a very powerful scene in that movie.
Yeah,
which will stay with you forever. Once you've seen
very,
it,
very powerful and long, and a very long scene. This is also another film in my category of films that have no soundtrack, really. I mean, there's almost no music in this film. Although famously, of course, the beginning of the film uses Mike Oldfield's a part of Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells. I mean, Mike Oldfield is well-known British musician, but yeah, that bit of Tubular Bells everyone knows because of The Exorcist. But yeah, there's some really, really, really affecting things, and Max von Sydow, of course,
crops up in it. Yes, of course. Yes,
quite famously as the old priest. Wait, I'm getting Merrin is the old. I got the name wrong. So Merrin is the surname of Sydow's character. The younger priest was called Damien, Father Damien. Can't remember what his surname was. Anyway, but great film, and very interesting story. They had to, like The Shining, they had to film that in a way that the young girl playing the girl in the film didn't know what was going on. I mean, she had no idea until she was an adult what that film was about, because they shot it. I mean, I don't even know how they did it, and in a lot of cases, how they shot that film without her having any inkling of what she was and what the film meant. So props to William Friedkin for that. Karras, Father Karras, yeah.
I'll just mention about Friedkin as well, is that he arguably directed, a contender for one of the best action movies of all time, and a contender for one of the best horror movies of all time, back to back, because he did French Connection and then he did Exorcist back to back. I mean, that's
incredible. The French Connection, absolutely incredible. Again, tour de force filmmaking, and also, I mean, a lot of the exorcism scenes were shot in a freezer, like in a literal industrial freezing warehouse, which is why you see their breath. So very, very interesting film. But yeah, I would say The Exorcist is great. And another film that whose ending doesn't screw up the ending. The ending is brilliant. Yeah, the ending is brilliant.
So just moving on in 73, while I'm looking through this list, I mean, there is absolutely heaps of schlock and dross and stuff like in between all these movies. It's not just all pure gold, In fact, I'm watching some franchises reach like a second, third sequel just in the course of 1 year. How they managed to do that, I don't know. But I will mention one movie. Well, there's one huge movie we need to talk about, but before we get to that, I always had this idea of a supervillain who did Shakespeare themed murders, like, he's going to do this one as Hamlet, or he's going to do this one as Othello, right?
I like it.
I thought, well, that's a kind of cool supervillain, never been done. But the 1973 film Theatre of Blood, starring Vincent Price, is literally that as a movie.
They did it. Yeah, amazing.
So it's been done. It exists. So I mean, it's not like a brilliant movie or anything, but I just wanted to mention that it's one of those times where I had an idea and then figured somebody had actually done it already.
It's crushing, because I mean, just when you mentioned that, it sounds like it's a great idea. It's a great idea. So I can't imagine somebody has missed doing that, and of course they haven't. Maybe it needs a remake.
In fact, there's two. We have to mention Westworld very quickly.
Westworld,
I don't know if you've seen it, but just in terms of the fact that we kind of live in a dystopian future.
Yeah, we do. And Michael Crichton was quite based in certain ways, I would say.
Yeah, so I don't know. It's just worth like Westworld. I think is if you haven't seen it, it's one of those films that's slightly forgotten. Maybe did they remake? Did they remake it or something? Maybe it had like a renaissance when it was remade. But I remember watching it kind of and being caught off guard by it some years ago, thinking, oh, this is a really good movie. So yes, and anyway, the final movie we have to talk about from 1973.
Drum roll.
Well, obviously it's The Wicker Man.
Yeah, of course.
Which is another stone cold S tier horror movie,
Yeah.
another contender for best horror movie of all time. I think I did do a whole stream on it with Survive the Jive back in the.
Oh yeah, I
subscribe to the channel.
Yeah.
You'll see there's a whole stream we did on Wicker Man. I think it was on Cigar Stream back then rather than Deepest
It was a
Lore.
Cigar Stream. Yeah, it was definitely.
But yeah, I mean, what else is there to say? It's just phenomenal film, and you know we've talked a lot about Christopher Lee, but for me that's his finest outing. You know,
yeah,
and I love the. It's kind of interesting. We talked about film that takes Christianity seriously in The Exorcist. This is there's an interesting kind of turning of the tables in Wicker Man where it's this rather uptight, slightly puritanical fellow, the cop, going into this rather louche kind of pagan setting, and it's. I don't know. I've always felt like the Wicker Man plays with where your sympathies are, right? Where, because like this cop is kind of like the first time I ever watched Wicker Man. By the time it reaches the end, I was like, yeah, I'm kind of with them, you know.
he's not. Yeah, he's right. He's not an entirely sympathetic character, no.
But then when I watched it, when I watched it again, I was I don't know, I was more with him, but it's just kind of interesting that it does play with that a little bit. That it asks questions of his morality, I think, in a quite a probing and penetrating way. And it's kind of hard to know, like when Lord Summerisle is giving his kind of seducing speeches and so on, like, is he in a strange way also seducing the audience? But then is the film talking about the 60s or something? I don't know. It's very interesting, to say the least.
Yeah, it is. Before we move on, I just have to mention from 1973, I would be remiss. There was a film called Flesh for Frankenstein, directed by Paul Morrissey, and originally titled Andy Warhol's Frankenstein. So this was one of a couple of films that were made in the early 70s by Paul. If you remember our Warhol stream, Paul Morrissey, who was sort of leading the activities of Warhol's milieu at that time, and was the one responsible for sort of turning Andy from the idea of doing art films to doing actual films. It was made in Italy at Cinecittà by Italians, and so they're not technically Andy Warhol films. Andy had nothing to do with either of them. It was Paul Morrissey and Joe D'Alessandro and Monique Van Doren and a couple of other Warhol people went over to Italy to be in the films, but they're Andy in name only. But yes, Andy did venture into the world of 70s Italian schlock. So,
what was the Italian government doing at this time? Just throwing money at like shit films,
throwing money in, you know. I mean, well, of course, they of course had Fellini to kind of prop up the entire industry, and then they were churning out shite, but they were making money. I mean, all these films made money because they were all done. Most of them were done very cheaply. So yeah, I mean, it was a money spinning thing to kind of, you know, keep Fellini in business. I
think. All right, so in 1974, there's another film I've mentioned a number of times. It's kind of a little bit under the radar, but I recommend people watch it. In fact, it'd be a good movie to watch for Halloween if you've never seen it before. And that is a Black Christmas. Black Christmas.
Never seen
Now,
it.
Black Christmas is, I would argue, the film that basically invented the 70s vogue for the slasher movie and the the creepy voice down the phone and all that sort of stuff. It's all in Black Christmas, and it's one of those films that falls under the radar a little bit, but genuinely, I mean, it's if I was doing the tiers, it's probably A tier rather than S tier, but it's a really, if I was making my list of like top 70s horrors, it would be probably in the top 10. I would say it's a very good film. And it's one of the ones that people don't talk about much. They tend to, they end up talking about Halloween or Friday the 13th or something. Whereas really Black Christmas is the true kind of burst of energy in that genre.
No, I've not seen it, so I'll have to check it out. I also should mention. Well, I should mention also that there was a film called Seizure, which was Oliver Stone's first film. I've not seen it, but I know of it, which was 1974. So Oliver Stone's directorial debut. There's also another film called Killdozer, which I think was a made. It was a made-for-TV film, but people have a lot of interest in that fellow who made the armored bulldozer and went around knocking down all the people that had wronged him in that town in America. So yeah, the inspiration for that may have been this film called Killdozer.
Do you know what's really amusing to do when you go through these D? Just linger on the Italian entries, like nude for Satan.
Nude for Satan. I just saw that, yeah.
Or Madeline, Anatomy of a Nightmare, if you look at the cover. God. I mean, the Italians are just churning out filth.
Oh, God. I have a friend that is absolutely obsessed with these films. So, who has an encyclopedic knowledge. I mean, yeah, Blood and Tits was the way to go in Italy in the 70s. Good Lord.
But right down the end of this 1974 list, D.
There it is.
Yet another stone cold S tier contender for best horror movie of all time. It's Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah.
Which to me is it's visceral. It's a film. It's one of the few films ever that grabs a hold of you and doesn't let go for the entire run. I mean, I don't know how long Texas Chainsaw Massacre is. 83 minutes, but it's 83 minutes and it doesn't let up for the whole running time. It is genuinely scary. It has some tremendous, I mean, it was made on a budget, low budget famously, but has some tremendous set design and costume and some genuinely innovative directorial stuff from Tobe Hooper. And I know in horror circles there's a kind of like, is Tobe Hooper an idiot savant in some way who managed to somehow, I don't know, create this masterpiece, and then he spends the rest of his life basically trying to recreate it with, I mean, his next movie, Eaten Alive, for example, if you ever watched that, is shite. Funhouse is bad, even though it sounds like.
Did he ever make another film? I don't know.
Well, Poltergeist is reasonably highly rated, but a lot of people believe that secretly Spielberg directed most of that movie, rather than
it does seem like a Spielberg film.
But really, I don't know what it is, but none of his other movies are anywhere near the level of this one. So maybe it's that thing. It's like this is a guy who can only work, like if he's given any money, it will kind of ruin he needs that creative constriction or something. But I mean, I honestly think Texas Chainsaw is another contender for absolute number one horror movie in my view.
And one of those films is thoroughly disturbing. I mean, you will be if you've not seen it, it will haunt you. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not just like obviously Leatherface is the iconic character, but it's, it's his family.
It's the whole family.
It's the whole
God.
setup.
Oh.
It's it's the squalor of the place and the bones and all of it. It's just and again that slight thing where you kind of hate the teenagers as well. You kind of hate them as well.
There's no one likable. There's no one likable in the film.
No.
All right.
We're gonna have to pick up the pace. I mean, there's so many. They're listing Jaws as a horror movie. What do you think about
Jaws? I mean, it's sort of a horror film. I mean, 1975 for me. Well, there are two films from 75. Can you guess what they are?
What? Salò.
Salò, yes, Pasolini's last film,
Is it Cronenberg's Shivers?
No, it's right above Salò.
Oh, right. Sorry, I didn't even see it there. Yeah. No, is that really a horror film?
No, it isn't a horror film, but the Rocky Horror Picture Show is 1975, and yes, of course, it is a favorite of mine. So I can't, I can't let that one go. Wonderful film. And Salò, again, be prepared if you've never seen it. Be prepared because you won't forget it.
I will just mention on the subject of Shivers, if that's the film I'm thinking of, is that the one that's set in that hotel with those little kind of slug creatures? That is a fucking disturbing film. It's like I have a mortal fear of slugs, D. I actually can't stand them. I really
Does anyone like slugs?
I'm slug phobic, as it were. But
how about snails?
I don't mind snails so much. It's more like the sheer grossness of the slug. But if you don't like slugs, Shivers is a really disturbing film.
Monstrous.
And I don't know, Cronenberg's a big director, for a while there, in the late 70s, early 80s. Salò. I mean, I've talked about being tainted and haunted for weeks after I watched that, and I've told the story before. We was doing this event in Chicago. This was about 12 years ago now, and they were all on this kind of trendy roof bar and enjoying kind of drinks and in super trendy financial district of Chicago. And I was like, sorry, I have to go. And I went to the Chicago Public Library, which is a pretty famous library. And I got all the books out on Pasolini and Salò until I got to the bottom of what the film was about. Because I needed to exercise it from my mind. This was about like 6 weeks after I'd seen it. Yeah. So.
Wow.
Yeah. I also had a blazing row over that film with my ex, who refused to watch it and thought that I was like depraved for watching it or whatever. She was just like, she took, which was a little bit thick. Somebody's if you watched Audition with someone, you think, well, but Salò was too much even for her, So,
I mean, Salò is. I mean, it's a category. I mean, the implications of that film, and I would say that there is relevance between that film and things that we experience with elites today.
Yeah.
But it's quite horrible. So be prepared.
I came to the conclusion actually that it wasn't really a film about fascism, as his claim, but it's a film about bourgeois commodification.
Exactly. Yeah.
And how. Yeah. Go on. Well, basically how it actually strips the pleasure and the joy out of everything, including like these kind of insane sexual depraved acts they're getting up to, and the tasting of the what and all the rest of it. I mean, it's like they strip whatever is vital and alive about those things. They end up stripping them out in a strange way and killing the energy in them. That's what I got. That's the conclusions I came to after several hours in Chicago Public Library.
Yeah, I think that's certainly fair. I don't think it's a film about fascism. as people claim. Vingle says Pasolini was a reactionary Catholic. I mean, he was and he wasn't, because he was also, he also was at various times in his life a full communist. But if you watch his films, I would say that perhaps even despite him, there is a strong reactionary element in many of them. There's, Corchile is another quite horrible film, which, yeah, God, yeah,
there's a lot of mythos around Pasolini and Sala, because wasn't he like?
Yeah, he was murdered on Ostia. He was murdered on a beach, probably by hustlers, but maybe by other characters who Italy had a very violent political culture in the 1970s, and it is possible that it was a hit. His murder could have been bad hustlers, or it could have been a hit. But yeah,
I hope it wasn't Julius Evolas boys.
No, I don't think. I think they would have been right in there with Pasolini. Again, if you've seen some of those films, yeah. Ooh, yeah. Right there. He also made a wonderful film about Christ very early on, the gospel according to St. Matthew. I think it's Matthew, but all right.
So 70-60, Burnt Offerings, starring Karen Black and Oliver Reed.
Offering, there it is.
What about Carrie by Brian De Palma?
Oh, Carrie is a wonderful film. Brian De Palma, yeah. Carrie, I would say that's really up there. That's very well.
Now,
very
you know
well
me,
made.
Dee, that I think the bullying is justified, but not the bullying in Carrie. Not the bullying in Carrie.
No, it's a different sort of bullying.
It's too dark. It's too dark, and it gave me.
Too dark.
I watched that film when I was too young.
I
mean, I watched many films when I was too young, but Carrie, I definitely watched Carrie when I was before I should have watched it, because that again is just so horrific. I should never have been allowed a TV in my own room, because many an hour when I was 13 and 14 I spent, or even younger maybe, watching films like Carrie and The Omen and things like that. When I probably should not have been watching these movies.
No, I wouldn't have allowed you to have the TV. But yeah, oh God, Carrie, yeah. Certainly, I mean, I would say there's quite a number of films that are basically brilliant films made in spite of the source material, and I would say that that one and The Shining, of course, both adaptations of Stephen King's work that take those works so far higher, in my opinion.
I mean, I'll probably upset a lot of Stephen King fans, but I'm of the opinion that all Stephen King is better when it's made as a film, or like all of his best work is done as films, rather than
by someone else,
by somebody else, with somebody with a superior artistic vision.
Exactly, like Brian De Palma or Stanley Kubrick. But the prom sequence in Carrie is unforgettable. Classic film sequence, and I think one of the first films to use slow motion in that way. I would say the use of slow motion in Carrie is extraordinarily influential, but most people don't use it. Most people, it doesn't work. It worked very well in Carrie.
Yeah, I'll just mention really quickly that would you agree Carrie is brilliant, but it's still A and not S?
Yes, I would agree. Because there's enough of the bones of the Stephen King story in there that that I think keep it from being a truly S tier film.
Just looking down the list to see what else is around.
Well, there's another Brian De Palma, Obsession, which
is
quite well known, and of course, right below that, another big 70s film, The Omen.
The Omen, yeah. I remember The Omen scared the shit out of me as well. When you watch these films alone in the dark with nobody else around, these are kind of ideal set, and preferably when you're younger, these are ideal settings for them to
Yeah,
try for
it's
life.
true.
And
It's
then
not
you
a blacked up octopus. It's a Halloween octopus. Sorry.
But I think I remember telling you before that this shadow was shining through the window of my bedroom, and it looked like an upside down cross. After watching The Omen, I was like, I cannot have this upside down cross. So I had to like take like exceptional measures to change the room so that it didn't fall in that way anymore. So
amazing.
Yeah, I mean, again, not an S, but
Not
a very
an
good
S,
movie.
no.
Maybe an A, maybe a B even.
Yeah, there's a little bit of schlock, I would say, in the Omen, but
it's a bit mainstream. It's a bit mainstream. Am I wrong?
All right. Well, so is Carrie, for God's sake.
Yeah, again, a bit mainstream. I would if ever Gregory Peck turns up in a movie, I feel like Gregory Peck is on the side of the regime.
Gregory Peck? Oh, dear.
I feel like Gregory Peck is a regime.
No.
I mean, isn't he in what's that movie they make everyone watch? Boo Ridley, To Kill a Mockingbird. And,
To Kill a Mockingbird. Oh, come on.
Pure boomer truth. And anyway, it's good. No, The Omen is good.
Yeah.
All right, what else have we got?
You finish up there with 76. I have to go check on the dog. It will just take me half a minute.
All right. Well, there's The Tenant, which is a Pinteresque Roman Polanski movie. I'm not sure about that being a horror. There's also a lot of films I've not heard of, like Schizo by Pete Walker. Maybe that's a film that a lot of people should watch. A lot of schizos around these days. The Meat Cleaver Massacre, starring Christopher Lee. Yet another Christopher Lee vehicle I have not watched. The Meat Cleaver Massacre. Well, what's that then? I've never even heard of it. Okay. I will very quickly get a drink while D is sorting his dog out. Let's have a quick break, folks. I need to get a drink, and then we'll hurtle through.
Back. Hello. Oh, he's gone as well. Okay. Well, let's see. Oh,
let us. Didn't take me long. Let me hit some more of these super chats before D comes back.
What? No, I'm back.
He is back. All right. Sorry, D. I didn't. There's a film called Schizo, which I thought was funny, and also there's a film called The Meat Cleaver Massacre, starring Christopher Lee, which appears to be some sort of documentary where Christopher Lee is just like stuck on the front of it as a kind of on-screen narrator type thing. So it's not a real movie. Hold on. D, you there?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I when I put my headphones down, I accidentally turned you down. So let's have a look at 77 then.
Oh, 77. Oh, okay. There's a few big ones in 77.
Demon Sneed.
Demon Sneed.
No, I can see there's a very big one. Again, we might question whether it is a horror movie. It probably is.
It's one of my favorite films. If we're thinking of the same one from 1977. Well, obviously we are. Yeah. Eraserhead.
Yeah. Is it a horror movie?
It is a horror movie. It is. The horror of the body and its function. I would say. In heaven, everything
becoming
is
a
fine.
father. I actually think that it's the horror of being a new parent.
Yeah, as I said, it's the horror of the body and its functions. So Eraserhead is David Lynch's first proper feature film. It took years. I mean, he worked on this for like, I don't know how many years, 3 or 4 years. Everything was done, it was all done. He was involved in everything, including the sound design, which is one of the more notable aspects of Eraserhead. But it is, I would say, a very strong directorial debut, and certainly sets the tone for David Lynch's concerns throughout the rest of his career.
It also has a genuine sense of claustrophobia about it. I would say there's something about the way it's shot and the way that you kind of feel like motion sick, and there's something about the whole thing that has a pressure to it, if that makes any sense.
No, certainly.
Yeah.
And just, I mean, again, Jack Nance, who plays the main character, amazing performance. I mean, first of all, very little of it. There's very few shots of like being outside, and outside isn't good. I mean, there is something unspecified. Like it's not really specified where it's set or when it's set, but it's not good wherever it is. It isn't good. And there's just so many great things in that film.
Directly underneath it, D is listed The Exorcist II: The Heretic. Do you remember I mentioned that book, the Golden Turkey Awards earlier? Richard Burton stars in The Exorcist II.
Yeah.
I mean, if you click on the Wikipedia link, it says The Exorcist II is often considered one of the worst films ever made. Right?
Yeah.
Just if you have time, sit through that and write down Richard Burton's lines. It's just mental, Pazuzu, take me to Kamulu. It's fucking mental. It is
Richard Burton. He's another one of those actors who I stumbled onto Hard Times or stumbled into something. I mean, of course,
drink a bottle. That's what he did.
Yeah, I think that's what he stumbled into. And it didn't work out well. I mean, and starting with what is that film? Candy.
Mm-hmm.
Which you may be one of the few people who knows about.
Me.
Yeah, I mean that literally, if you watch that, the Richard Burton character is, certainly when you first see him, that is AA's entire fantasy of being an academic. When he comes into the lecture hall with the wind blowing his scarf, and he reads that a ridiculous poem.
I mean, one of my great kind of side loves is Richard Burton's whole career, but he does it his whole career. He's like, he's in something as brilliant as Who Created Virginia Woolf, and then he's in like, some absolute shite, like literally at the same time. He has one of the worst script selection processes ever. I do know he's in Equus around this time.
He is in Equus, yeah,
which is not bad actually, and he's in the 1984 movie later on, which is very good, and he is very good in it as well. Richard Burton in bad movies is one of my kind of guilty pleasures, I guess. Have you ever seen Villain? Have you ever seen that one?
No, never seen it. He does bad very well. I mean, he's also another one of those actors who ended his career with, I'd say, a slightly ignominious turn. His last role was as a guest of the week in the American 80s television action show called The Fall Guy.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, that was Richard Burton's last role. A bit like Raul Julia being whose last film was Street Fighter film, and Or wait, was it Street Fighter? Yeah.
Do you know
Bison.
Do you know Richard Burton actually got married to Elizabeth Taylor again?
Oh yeah, famously remarried. Yeah. Which just wasn't a good idea.
Almost as bad as when George Sanders married married his ex-wife's sister, and I think the marriage lasted for like 90 days or something.
Oh God!
And then he committed suicide.
Yeah, I'm bored. Goodbye.
All right, so moving on.
Then we have The Hills. Then we have another big one. The Hills Have Eyes.
Yeah.
Is Wes Craven is.
Yeah, and Wes Craven became he was a big director for a while.
Director certainly in the 80s, I would say.
Yeah, did we skip over the Last House on the Left, because that is a fucking brutal movie?
I don't think we did. I would have noticed that. I was sort of looking for that one.
I'm looking at his filmography now, and it was 1972. Quite why it's missing from the Wikipedia entry, I don't know.
72. Oh yeah, that's a really brutal film. That's
a horrible movie. It's not. I wouldn't even say it's a tier, but it's an art. So what do they call it? A video nasty or whatever. So it's a nasty.
Yeah.
Exploitation horror. I got into like deep exploitation for a while. As you do. And Last House on the Left is one of the kind of classics of that genre, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's nasty. It really is. Anything else?
All right, I'm going to pick out one. I'm going to pick out a favorite bad film, which is Michael Winner's The Sentinel.
Oh, Winner back in action.
Michael Winner back in action. Have people seen this film called The Sentinel?
I don't think I have.
Have you seen it?
I don't think I have.
Oh, okay. So this this film is, I would say, one of the early attempts to cash in on The Exorcist. It involves a young model who moves to Brooklyn to pursue her career. She's already successful, and she moves to Brooklyn, and she moves into a flat in a house which, should I spoil it? I'll spoil it a bit. She moves into a house which inadvertently contains the gates to hell.
Right.
And of course, in true 70s fashion, it turns out that there has to be a guardian of these gates, which is the Sentinel referred to in the title. And the current guardian is a blind priest who sits in an upstairs room in this house and looks out into the New York harbor, and he's getting very long in the tooth, and they need to replace him. So yeah, I mean, there's literally a scene where she pulls off like a piece of wood near the post boxes in this apartment house, and sees like Dante's inscription, like "Lasciate ogni speranza," abandon all hope, ye who enter here. It's a terrible film.
The screenshots of this film look horrific. It looks. I mean, by which I mean they're disturbing. These images I'm looking at.
So this is the other thing. It's a bad, terrible, stupid film, and yet it's properly disturbing because, like Freaks, like Todd Browning's Freaks, there are actually like deformed and disabled people in this film.
I've also noticed Christopher Walken is here.
Well, look at the cast.
Yeah, as well as Burgess Meredith looking.
Burgess playing Satan. Yeah, he plays the devil.
He looks identical to how he looked in Burnt Offerings from the year beforehand. So clearly he had a late career renaissance as a.
Yeah, playing a kindly Satan. Yeah, I mean, and also I didn't need to read the cast, like Christina Rains, Chris Sarandon, Ava Gardner, Burgess Meredith, Sylvia Miles, Eli Wallach, Christopher Walken, Jeff Goldblum, John Carradine, Jerry Orbach, Tom Berenger, and Beverly D'Angelo. There's a lot of people in this film who should have known better.
What is
Anyway,
it about Michael Winner and his ability
Michael
to get
Winner, I mean, it's
casts like that
such
together?
Jose Ferrera's in it. Martin Balsam, a big made-for-TV star. Yeah, God's sake. And I believe it was it Christopher Walken's first film? Or was it Jeff Goldblum's first film?
I feel like Christopher Walken's first film was Annie Hall.
Annie Hall was after this. I think Annie Hall was 78, maybe?
Let's have a look.
Yeah, why don't you check for me? No, Annie Hall was earlier.
Yeah, same year.
77, same year. So this may have been his. Yeah, he plays his. That's right. He plays Annie Hall's mental brother. But anyway, watch the Sentinel because it's quite horrible. It's really, God's sake. And also a bit of flair is that your beloved Jennifer Connelly actually grew up in a house right across from the house in this film. That's where she spent her childhood.
I hope she was. I hope she was all right. I hope she didn't get too scared.
He's supposed to. Oh, it's such a. There's also a very uncomfortable scene, where Beverly D'Angelo, who is, I would say, famous for being in National Lampoon films, masturbates herself to completion.
Oh, God's sake.
Yeah.
It seems like I'm picking up the vibe though from just looking around D as we've been talking that this film seems to have like a revisionist fan following at this point.
It does.
Like a lot of people saying that it's actually a lost classic and people need to reassess it and all that sort of stuff.
No, it's not. It's a terrible film. They re-released this in the 2000s. I bought it on DVD when they re-released it because, but I don't like it. But you know, it's an Exorcist knockoff, and there's some really terrible material in it. But it is It is disturbing. It manages to be disturbing and bad at the same time. But for Michael Winner completists, it's a must watch.
I don't think there's a single person on earth who's a Michael Winner completist. Yeah. But by the way, just a couple down from that, there's another film here from 1977 that I would say it's pushing S tier as well.
Yes, which is Suspiria.
Yes. By Dario Argento. Now, we've given Italy a hard time on this stream, but Suspiria, I would say, is in a class of its own. It really is just kind of absolutely bonkers film. You've mentioned several films that don't have a soundtrack. Suspiria does have a soundtrack, a fucking mental banging goblin soundtrack.
Famous soundtrack. I would say Argento is the master of the giallo. I mean, of this type of Italian film. Although I don't even know that you could call Suspiria a gialli. God's sake! But yeah, the Goblin soundtrack.
I feel like it transcends the trappings of that genre.
Yeah,
it's just a kind of because it is scary, it is melodramatic, it is visually
stylish as hell.
It's just brilliant. It's a brilliant film, and I've watched it a couple of times as well, and it was it stands up well when you watch it again. So that's another one. I mean, the 70s is extremely strong.
Loaded.
Been so many great movies. On to 78 and Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, D.
A stone cold classic, I would say. Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. I've literally, that is I would say a brilliant parody. It's up there with the Kentucky Fried Movie from this period. Yeah.
All right. There's a few. Dawn of the Dead. I've mentioned that I do not like the later Romero movies. I do know that Dawn of the Dead has a following, though.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of like Ramiro fans who pick out that one as the best. I don't like it. I feel like how can I put this? I feel like Romero becomes too self-aware, and he's almost like a kind of socially aware student trying to like slip messages in all the time, you know. So when it's like overtly about, I don't know, like commercialism or something, I kind of lose interest. It's much better done in Night of the Living Dead for me. So
yeah.
yeah. So I don't know. I feel like he's not skilled enough at his messaging to do what he wants to do there. Halloween is another big movie. John Carpenter.
Yes, 78. Very big film.
Bit mainstream, but
No,
it's good. It's good.
No,
it's good.
Halloween
It's
is
good.
Halloween
It's
is
good.
good.
It's good. It's effective.
It's certainly effective, and it is one of the better ones of that genre, which would come to dominate the 80s.
However, if you've seen Black Christmas, you'll know it's a rip-off. You know,
right.
Halloween rips off Black Christmas. So, another nasty film. In the I Spit on Your Grave.
I Spit on Your Grave. I was just going to say that's another horrible film. Oh God. Yeah. The Eyes of Laura Mars is also a very creepy film. If you've never seen it, it's a kind of there was a sort of thing in the late 70s, kind of revived film noir. So you think of things like Chinatown, which is sort of like that. This is another one of those, and it's fairly good. Yeah.
Faye Dunaway.
Yeah, Eyes of Laura Mars.
There's also the Donald Sutherland Invasion of the Body Snatchers there, which everybody knows from the memes, of course.
That's a very upsetting film, I would say. But the ending of that is really horrible. It's very black-pilled. Very black-pilled.
Yeah, nothing else really.
Oh no, magic.
Oh yes, another puppet movie.
Another puppet movie with Burgess Meredith and Anthony Hopkins. Yeah. Directed by Richard Attenborough. Yeah. Oh, it's good. No, it's good.
I tell you, a hidden gem, not listed, right? Horror, starring Richard Attenborough, is 10 Rillington Place. 10 Rillington Place,
Ooh.
Where it's from 1971. I think it probably wasn't listed because it was a teeny movie, maybe, but or it's not a horror film. It's not classed as a horror, but that is genuinely a good movie. It's got John Hurt in it, but Richard Attenborough plays a complete psychopath in that, like a serial killer in that movie. So if you like serial killer movies,
I've not seen it. I will have to look into it because. Also, there's another film from '78 called The Shout with Jim Broadbent and John Hurt and Tim Curry, which is sort of curious. Yeah.
I haven't seen that. It's an interesting sounding cast.
Yeah, I remember it being slightly
early outing for Jim Broadbent. I associate him with being an old man in the 90s, mainly.
Exactly. He was pre-old man, yeah, and Tim Curry, of course, establishing himself outside of Rocky Horror.
And then moving on to '79, and I'm just having a look to see. Anything.
Big ones. Come on, Alien.
Oh right at the top. Yes, Alien. Yeah, no, we're counting that as a horror movie, are we?
Yes. I mean, yeah, it's a horror. Come on. I mean, I would say an S tier film, Alien.
Yeah, it's good.
You hesitated. I don't like it.
It's good.
No, it's excellent. Alien is excellent.
I don't know. I'm loath to praise things that are too mainstream. No, it's good. It's good.
All right. How about number 2, the Amityville Horror, another huge film. You know that one?
Yeah. I'm not enthusiastic about 79.
All right, come on. I love both of those. And okay, I'll pick a hipster choice. It is a film called Nosferatu the Vampire, directed by Werner Herzog, starring Klaus Kinski. A bit mental. That
is that a remake of Nosferatu?
It is sort of a remake, and the Werner Herzog Klaus Kinski pairing is something to behold.
Is that Herzog? It's an early film for Herzog, but apparently he was making films from the 60s onwards. So
he's been at it a long time. I'm still working.
So. Yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying. How old is he?
Old.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. 42, like Bob Dylan's age, essentially. Okay.
Yeah, remember him fairly recently doing an interview in which someone accidentally shot him. He got shot in the arm from afar. Anyway, very Herzog. I'm surprised Klaus Kinski didn't shoot him.
I will say, just to go back on Alien very quickly. I remember reading an awful lot of stuff about Alien being like, male terror at kind of pregnancy and things like this. What do you think of all those sorts of readings?
That's the standard line. God's sake.
I mean, what do you think of all that?
I don't know. Maybe. There's a lot of things going on in Alien. It's not just that, I would say. I mean, of course, famously, the Alien was designed by H.R. Giger, and to be a weird hybrid of the vulva and the penis. So yeah, there's some body horror going on in there, but it's such a well constructed film, and it's got such an atmosphere. And I mean, again, that is how, if you're going to do a film with a female protagonist, I mean, that there are ways to do it without turning her into, Mary Sue girl boss, I would say. Anyway.
So we've reached the end of the 70s, right? We've reached the end of the 70s. We have to pick one out for the decade.
No, I'm not picking one.
You must.
No.
You must decide. You must choose. The second option is eternal suffering.
Okay. I'm picking The Exorcist. That's it. Yeah.
I think I'm going to go with Texas Chainsaw for the reasons I outlined.
Good.
So
I could have easily picked many other films.
Yeah, I mean, Suspiria is another brilliant one. I mean, what else? Eraserhead is great. Wicker Man. Wicker Man is an easy pick as well.
All of those. Someone in the chat says the first Phantasm film, which it's worth watching. But
all right. Let us. So, how are we going to do this, D? Because we're never going to.
We can't. No, we
can't go with a slow pace.
Should we do part 2?
Poor old Pharaoh. We can't do that.
Listen, Pharaoh screwed the pooch. Pharaoh missed his chance. He had his chance to return, and he fucked it up.
Let's just.
Why don't we bring Pharaoh on for part 2?
Let me just deal with the 80s in 2 minutes. How about that?
Oh.
No. Oh, God damn it.
All right. Let's just look. I'm just looking at 1980. 1980. Oh.
Look, Red Hawk's talking about doing Looney Tunes.
Do you want to filthy degenerate like Red Hawk talking about Looney Tunes? Come on.
Let me just ask let's just ask the fans. They can vote.
Well, yeah, we're doing democracy.
Yeah, I'm asking if they want a part 2. I mean, I can deal with the 80s really quickly because if you ask me.
Yeah, but then what do you do about the 90s and the 2000s?
Oh God.
No, there's no way. Come on, you knew we were never going to get through this in one stream.
Who thought of starting in the 1920s anyway? It was a bright idea.
You.
We should have started in. We should have pulled a Boom of Truth and started in 1960.
No. You had to have the 20s. Come on. One of the best ones. Yeah, there's too many to do, and we can't skip over them. I mean, for God's sake, The Shining is 1980.
All right, okay, fair enough. I've asked. Maybe it's the only time you'll hear me talk about Henry's Portrait of a Serial Killer, or Bad Boy Bubby, or you know.
God, that's no. Oh, is that? Oh,
no, I think it was 90.
Is that the one with cling film?
Oh, it's just.
Oh,
there are some bad ones.
God, there's some real nasty shit coming.
Have you ever seen Maniac by William Lustig?
Oh,
sorry. I mean, okay.
And in The Audition, as you mentioned.
Yes, they want a part 2.
All right.
Good. Okay. Let's just remind us. Poor old Pharaoh. It's going to be like Christmas before he. We're going to have to have a chat with him.
He had a chance. I mean, we could always skip and then do it after Pharaoh, and Pharaoh's welcome to come on. You know.
Let's just remind ourselves. So I went. Haxan 20s, Freaks 30s, Dead of Night 40s. What a straight bat that is. 50s. I cannot remember my pick for the 50s. What did I pick for the 50s? I think I picked the Mummy, the Hammer horror Mummy, and then 60s I went with Night of the Living Dead. 70s I went with Texas Chainsaw so far. What about you, D?
Oh, for the 20s I picked Nosferatu. For the 30s, what did I pick? Freaks. For the 40s, did I pick one for the 40s? Wait!
I'm trying to remember.
Sorry, dog action going on. I don't remember what I did for the 40s.
Wasn't it Invasion of the Body Snatchers or something?
Maybe. Yeah, let's just say that's it. For the 50s, what did I pick? What are they called? Klaatu Radha-Nikto. What's his name? The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Yeah.
For the 60s, what did I choose? I don't remember these things. The Birds. Yeah, in the 70s, the 70s I chose The Exorcist.
Okay.
So, Your Mother Sews Socks That Smell.
Hey, Mr. D, have you checked out the new Harry Enfield show? One episode is released. It is very based on Blair and gives Ashes of Britain vibes very well. Excellent stuff. Please watch. I would say Harry Enfield has been quietly based for many, many years.
Yeah, for many, many years.
So, maybe why not? Last time I saw something funny, I can't even remember.
No,
last time
maybe
funny was on.
I didn't know Harry Enfield was doing anything. So
I didn't even know he was alive. Yeah. No, well, yeah, I did. But,
David Cameron, is he a queer? Queer.
The bankers, the bonuses. The bankers, the bonuses.
He looks like a queer, and he sounds like a queer. Bunny, you're a queer, aren't you? Oh, I'm afraid for queer. Anyway, sorry.
Herlock Shome says Attack of the 50-Foot Sunak is creepy as well. Frunion says Attack of the 50-Foot Lizzo. Anu Ra says my mental image of D is Richard Chamberlain's rendition of the Count of Monte Cristo. There is something uncannily creepy about the cursed porcelain doll. I love the 1999 version of The Mummy. So there we go. Stella O'Neill says, congratulations on the 100th Deepest Lore. Picked up a Love and Theft CD for $3 at my local record store last week. Well, that was a steal. You could almost say it was a theft out of love.
Oh.
Looking forward to the third Dylan stream someday. Thanks for your work. Yeah, maybe one day that third Dylan stream will make an appearance just after Pharaoh comes back. Gandhi Bob Flanker says horror should be tragic and paranormal. The victims have to bring it on themselves, or it is just nihilism. Crazy guy stabbing people is not paranormal. I'm not sure if I agree with the fact that it has to have a paranormal element.
No.
I think that horror. I mean, we didn't really talk philosophically about what the heart of horror is, but I think it has to just get into your those primal fears that you have in whatever way,
or to create them, or to subvert, the safe, comfortable things, and make you terrified of them, like the shower or the birds. Yeah.
Den Terrell says, would yourself and Dee do a stream about aesthetically beautiful movies, beautiful people, locations? I'm tired of seeing ugliness in everything. Yeah, I mean, there was talk about doing that before with Farah, wasn't there? Do you remember we all picked out brilliant shots of movies? Did we ever do that stream?
No, we never did that.
I picked out a pile of Powell and Pressburger, and you picked some of the earlier Pasolini movies and things like that.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's put that on the schedule for 2028. Yeah.
Proper Horror Show says, forgive a cheeky shill for my video analyzing Invasion of the Body Snatchers from 1978 and its incredibly dissident messaging. It's called Fear the City. Yeah, I mean, this is another thing that horror does as well, in a strange way, is that it kind of manifests things that are in the ether that people are worried about but not talking about in weird ways. Do you remember, like I was saying, how like the Wicker Man somehow registers 60s counterculture, but in a way that is horrific?
Yeah.
I think a lot of the best horror films tap into something dark that's happening at a societal wide level somehow.
Yeah, I would agree.
Basque Dude says, Mr. D, deepest lore on the sonnet of the asshole when?
No, we're never going to talk about that again. Okay, we're not going to talk about that again.
Mr. Theo Tugboat says, sorry, D, I hate Rocky Horror. Deeply subversive. Is Rocky Horror deeply subversive, D?
No. Rocky Horror is wonderful. Wonderful. I mean, keep in mind that Frankenfurter is punished for his sins at the end. Frankenfurter, it's all over. Yeah, so no, not subversive. Not subversive. You're wrong.
Deeply subversive.
Spasticus Autistica says, what film best conveys Lovecraftian horror?
People don't do love. I mean, I can't think of a Lovecraft film. Because how would you? That would be very difficult. Well, it'd be easier to do it in the age of computer graphics, but
I mean, I don't know if it counts as Lovecraftian, but I've always liked the Frank
Aliens.
Darabont.
I mean, Aliens slightly. What did you say?
Well, I've always liked the Frank Darabont film, The Mist.
Oh, The Mist, yeah.
Now, I don't know if that is Lovecraftian, but I would say the creatures in that, I don't know, you could say they must be inspired by Lovecraft or something. If you see the giant creatures in the mist and the giant spiders, and it's all a bit kind of Cthulhu-like, is it not? I mean,
yeah. I mean, someone says The Thing, that Carpenter's The Thing. I mean, maybe a little bit. They don't have the sort of overwhelming scale, But
they do in The Mist, is what I'm saying. They have that. They're massive creatures.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a bit of a spoiler. Probably be my pick of the noughties, that movie.
And another case of a Stephen King story being elevated.
Was The Mist him? Was it?
I think so.
Boo, I hate King. But he's so many good horrors based on.
Am I wrong about that? Is The Mist Stephen King?
Seems like it might be, Yes.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, it is. I didn't know that.
I thought so. Someone in the chat suggests Pacific Rim.
Oh, there we are.
No.
All right. I think that's all.
Lizzo is sort of Lovecraftian horror, isn't she?
Honestly, I think The Mist may be the answer, unless there's been like direct Lovecraft adaptations.
I can't think of any.
I
How would you turn the Cthulhu books into a film? That's like trying to make a film of Dune, which is a doomed enterprise.
Yeah, no, superior artists have tried and failed in the past. Let's. I mean, if you just have a look, if you haven't seen this film, The Mist, I mean, is that not Lovecraftian? That looks Lovecraftian to me. No. Anyway, D, anything you'd like to promote, sir, before we get out of here?
No, just tune in on Twitter for my random spaces if you like, or don't. I don't care.
Just a last-minute super chat. I think I can answer this question. Which horror film caused the big goth fetish? I think I know the answer to this. I think it was a Wes Craven movie called what was it called? That film, The Raven, was it? Wes Craven movie with a guy in the black jacket. Came out in the 90s.
No, there were goths in the.
No, I'm talking about the 90s goth revival, not the.
Oh, that okay.
Yeah, not the. It was kind of a big aesthetic for a while. That.
You mean the big heeled boots with all the buckles and the vinyl tops and.
I don't know what would have caused it in the. No, not Wes Craven. What was the bloody name of that film?
The Crow. The Crow.
The Crow.
Yeah, with Brandon. What's he called? Brandon Lee, who was
Brandon
killed.
Lee. Yeah.
Yeah, who was killed. Who was Alec Baldwin with a loaded gun on the set.
I feel like The Crow was responsible for the 90s goth revival. And how it seeped into the culture, and even into things like pro wrestling, because Sting became the kind of Crow version of Sting in the late 90s. So that shows how mainstream it got.
Possibly, but then you got like Winona Ryder's character in Beetlejuice. I mean that was a big, and that was earlier. That was like 88.
I mean, Edward Scissorhands is a bit goth.
Edward Scissorhands, and of course, I would say the entry into the mainstream of The Cure, with Disintegration and all that. I think it was something brewing in the late 80s that certainly was nudged in the 90s by The Crow and stuff.
I remember watching a interview once about this, right? God knows why or when. And this guy was saying, "Oh no, I'm not a goth. I'm a vampire. I'm a vampire." And so there was some of the earlier people saw the goths as a kind of bastardization of what they wanted to do, because they were more pure and were like actually vampires or whatever. So whether that's true or not, I don't know, but I remember seeing it. All right. Yes, I will just mention last chance, your very last chance to get £100 off the Mega Bundle using promo code MEGA. The sale Merit will start tomorrow. Merit with Unpopular Opinions. Just after this, I think a number of people are streaming tonight, D. I think Semiagog is doing a Halloween-related stream. AM is doing something on Pakistan. Woes, who I met this past weekend, is doing his thing on Telegram. So there's a lot of stuff going on tonight. Monday nights are packed. On Twitter, I'll be finishing up my my girl tournament. So if you've been voting in that, follow OG Roland Rat on Twitter. But other than that, get out. Get out.
What goes on in this town is none of your business.
As long as I'm living here, it is.
Then maybe you shouldn't be living here!